Belinda Audio and the O'Brien Press present this unabridged recording of The Chisellers, Agnes Browne, Book 2. Written and read by Brendan O'Carroll.
Dublin, 1970. As he sat on his high stool behind the podium centre stage, Pat Muldoon scanned the assembly before him. It was an impressive sight. An audience of 500 at least, all sitting facing him with their heads bowed. The silence was eerie, the only sound in this packed room being the whirring of the bingo machine as it tossed its numbered balls and fed them up the tube at random. Pat Muldoon had been calling the bingo numbers at St. Francis Xavier Hall since 1962. In those 8 years, never before had he seen the snowball reach the massive sum that it stood at tonight. The makeshift sign outside the hall announced the record amount. Snowball, now standing at £615 and 53 calls. He felt it would be won tonight. The first person to shout check before he extracted the 53rd number would take it all. He read the number on the ball in his hand and called, "All the fours, 44. About 2/3 of the way down the hall and close to the toilets sat Agnes Browne and her merry group of 6. Next to Agnes was Carmel Dowdall, a neighbour of Agnes's in James Larkin Court, and like Agnes, Carmel had a 13-year-old daughter. Coincidentally, both young girls were named Cathy, and they were best pals both in and out of school. Sitting beside Carmel was a large red-faced woman, built like a man, and adding to this by wearing her husband's Crombie coat. This was Nellie Robinson. A long-time friend of Agnes's, Nellie, like Agnes, was a dealer in Moore Street, with a stall no more than 50 feet from Agnes's own pitch. Sitting facing these three were Nellie's twin daughters, affectionately known to all the dealers in the market as Splish and Splash. The twin girls had matured well, and although quite pretty at 19, had still not managed to secure themselves either husbands or steady boyfriends. Probably because, thanks to a lisp they shared, they had an inability to say, "Give us a kiss," without covering their suitor in spittle. The last of the party of 6 was an elderly man. He was Bunny Morrissey. Agnes and the other women knew Bunny only from the bingo nights. A long-time widower, Bunny, like many others, used the bingo as a reason to get out for the night. He would arrive every Wednesday and Friday with a plastic check multicoloured shopping bag, from which he would remove his bingo board and clip, his 2 bingo pens, one red, one black, and then last of all, a single tattered tartan carpet slipper. This last item had an interesting history. 2 years previously, while coming down the stairs of his tiny pensioner's flat in Dorset Street, Bunny had slipped and twisted his ankle. The subsequent swelling meant that Bunny could not get his right foot into his shoe. So that evening Bunny had arrived at the bingo wearing just one shoe on his left foot and on his swollen right foot this carpet slipper. After 15 years of bingo playing, that night was the first night that Bunny had ever won anything. He collected £15 for a full house. And for the couple of seconds it took him to call check, he was the focus of every eye in the hall. Since that night, Bunny never started a night of bingo without first slipping off his right shoe and putting on his tatty lucky carpet slipper. Sadly though, since that night, Bunny had failed to win a single penny, and each bingo session would end with him firing the slipper into the plastic bag, grunting, "Lucky slipper, me bollocks." Yet, before every game, every night of the bingo, out would come the lucky slipper again. 1 and 7, 17, Mr. Muldoon called out, the 12th number. Suddenly a cry of check went up, and all heads lifted simultaneously and looked in the direction of the hand in the air, holding the salmon-coloured bingo book and claiming the lion prize. "Only 12 calls? That's early," Agnes said to Nellie. "Yeah, it is very early." The two stared over at the upraised hand. "Who is it?" asked Carmel. Your woman with the yellow teeth from Sheriff Street. Clark, I think her name is. Her husband does the telegrams, rides a motorbike," Agnes informed the group. "I hear that's not all he rides," remarked Nellie, and they all burst into laughter. There now followed a short interval during which the claim for a line would be checked. With only 12 numbers gone, it was looking very likely that the snowball would indeed be won this evening. Agnes used the interval opportunity to light up a cigarette, as did most of the other bingo players. The room was abuzz with anticipation as everyone realised the early call on a line meant that most probably the snowball would go. The bingo ball machine began to whirl again, and as the audience prepared themselves, Mr. Muldoon called, "Here we go for the full house and the snowball. Eyes down, and your first number is..." Every pen in the hall hovered, and the electricity of anticipation was so strong you could almost hear it hum. 2 fat ladies, 88. After a further 8 numbers, Agnes was able to mark off 7. Nellie, noticing the constant moving of Agnes's pen, half whispered to her, "Jesus, Agnes, you're flying." "I know, shut up, you'll put the fucking mockers on me." "Oh, was she worth it? 2 and 6, 26. Agnes didn't have 26, and she didn't have the next 6 numbers either. But over the next 15 calls, she steadily marked off a couple of 2s and 3s called, until she suddenly realised her card was starting to fill up. And then with just 4 calls to go, she had only 1 number left, the number 7. "Jesus, I have a weight," Agnes said to nobody in particular. "Agnes has a weight," echoed Carmel, passing on the news. "Oh, mammy, me nerves," mumbled Splash, picking up sudden tension. "Come on, number 7. Come on, number 7, said Agnes, as if she were in prayer. 2 little ducks, 22. Number 7, come on, number 7. Agnes was intoning now. "Pull it, mister, pull it. Oh, Jesus, Agnes." This was Carmel. Shut up. Come on, number 7. "Top of the house, 90. Agnes held her hand up to her now perspiring forehead. "Oh, what's wrong with you, mister? Come on, number 7. "And this is the final call for the snowball." "On its own, number 7. Please, God, on its own, number 7. "On its own? Yes, call it 7. "Number 4. There was a momentary silence and a collective intake of breath in the hall as everybody waited for the inevitable call of check. But it didn't come. Hardly anybody except those in her company heard Agnes's groan. The non-event was met with a mixture of sighs, moans, and then giggles in the knowledge that the big snowball would be there yet again this coming Friday, only even bigger. And with the calls moving up to 54, it had to be one. In the 3 years since the untimely death of Renzer Browne, his widow Agnes and her 7 children had flourished. Mark, the eldest boy, continued his training as a carpenter. Frankie was a handsome 16-year-old, though it was difficult to see it sometimes, for he had his head completely shaved, wore tartan shirt and wide parallel denims which were cut between the knee and the ankle to reveal tartan socks, over which he wore a pair of Doc Marten boots. This was the fashion for skinheads. The fad had begun in Britain with groups of white youths who spent their evenings drinking cider, dancing to reggae music, and then, like packs of wolves, they would hunt down and beat Pakistanis, Indians, West Indians, and homosexuals of any creed or colour. Frankie and the gang of thugs he hung out with were starved for targets. Dublin did not have a population of Indians, West Indians, or coloureds in general, so the homosexuals took the full brunt. Failing an encounter with a homosexual, these gangs would use anyone that looked weak, at least weaker than they were. He didn't realise it himself, but Frankie Browne was a neo-Nazi. This posed some problems for his younger brother Rory. As soon as Rory reached the working age of 14, he quit school and was now 1 year into a hairdressing apprenticeship. Monday after Monday, Rory would see his working colleagues and friends bruised and scarred from the weekend attacks by skinhead gangs. To a skinhead, all male hairdressers were queers. Rory kept his mind on his work, which he loved, and trod home carefully each evening. Rory spoke little to Frankie, and he trusted him less. Dermot Browne, on the other hand, was everybody's friend, bursting with energy, full of laughter, and always up to some mischief or other. His golden hair would glisten in the sunlight as he dashed about the football field, displaying his talents. He was popular too with the girls, his fair skin and smiling blue eyes making him the heartthrob of most of his sister Cathy's friends. Unfortunately, such was not the case with Dermot's twin brother Simon. Although Simon stammered less as he got older, the cast in his left eye was still there and still obvious. This gained him the nickname Giddy Eye. Like Dermot, Simon was in his first year at St. Declan's Technical School, but unlike Dermot, who seemed to excel at everything he touched, Simon had yet to find his particular talent in life. The one thing he was good at was religious knowledge. He loved praying and felt secure in the silence of the church, where he would sit for hours alone. His religious knowledge teacher thought that he might even have a vocation. Another of his talents was finding things. Agnes would call Simon her little St. Anthony, and whenever anything was lost or misplaced, Agnes would simply say, "Wait till Simon comes home, he'll find it." Right enough, within minutes of coming home, Simon would find the errant object. Cathy Browne, at 13 years of age, was in 6th class, her final year in the Mother of Divine Providence girls' school. Since her battle with Sister Mary Magdalene 3 years previously, Cathy was more or less left alone and began to flourish in school, so much so that she now had thoughts of going on to secondary school, something never before achieved by any Browne. Trevor at 6 was doing his second year in first class. He'd also had 2 years in high babies. Trevor was called a slow child, a term Agnes didn't really understand. Trevor's teacher, Miss Thomas, once asked Agnes if there was any history of dyslexia in the family, and Agnes, thinking it was some kind of tropical disease, emphatically answered no. Sure, they've never been out of the country, for God's sake. Agnes herself looked really well. Things had got a lot better in the last couple of years, with both Mark and Rory now bringing in a wage. Every week Rory handed up £2 and Mark £9, which was all but £1.15 of his wages. The black and white television which Mark had rented back in 1967 had now been replaced by a colour set. The sitting room and both bedrooms of the flat had carpets, and even though the kitchen still had linoleum, it was good flexible linoleum, not the kind that cracked when you bent it. And now that she could afford it, Agnes had her hair done once a month. She had it done in Wash and Blow, the salon where Rory was training, where she received a 20% discount thanks to Rory. It's amazing what a hairdo can do to lift a woman's spirits. That's just what Agnes was thinking as she ran the brush slowly through her raven black hair. She smiled at herself in the mirror. Outside in the hall, she heard the letterbox clatter and the plap of the post that had landed on the doormat. She placed the hairbrush down on a dressing table and went out to the hall and picked up the mail. She tucked it under her arm, went to the steaming kettle and made herself a mug of tea. Carrying the mug of tea to the kitchen table, she lit up a cigarette and began to open the letters. There were 3 letters in the post this morning. The light blue envelope, edged in red and navy stripes and with the Canadian stamp on it, was easily recognisable as a letter from Agnes's sister Dolly. No, not Dolly now. Now it's Dolores. Mrs. Dolores Gowland. Agnes smiled to herself. You see, Dolly had emigrated to Toronto 15 years previously in 1955, and for the first 2 or 3 years, she signed all her letters Dolly. In 1957, she began to go out with Larry Gowland, who worked in a bank no less, and after a courtship of 3 years, she married the poor chap. So it was that from 1960 onwards, Dolly read and signed all her letters Dolores Gowland. The second letter Agnes opened was from Mr. Cartwright, the principal of St. Declan's Technical School, where Frankie, Dermot and Simon were all pupils. The letter was about Frankie and his attendance, or lack of it. Mr. Cartwright indicated that he was now at the end of his tether with Frankie, and he suggested that Agnes pay him a visit as soon as possible to discuss the boy. Agnes rested her head on her hand and sighed deeply. Mark looked up from his instruction manual and saw the jaded look on Agnes's face. "What is it, Ma?" "Frankie's been missing school again." "Again?" "Yes, love, again." Mark closed the book and slowly walked over to the kitchen table to sit facing his mother. "Ma, I don't want to be a snitch, but you must know he spends his bleeding time hanging around with those scumbag friends of his, roaming around the streets all day in and out of bookie shops." "Bookies? Sure, where would he get the money?" asked Agnes. Mark looked away from her. "You tell me, Ma." They both knew where he got the money. Most mornings Agnes's purse would be a little lighter than it was the night before. With 7 children, it was hard to accuse one. All children are a little light-fingered. But in her heart, Agnes knew that the odd half-crown or 2 shillings that vanished each day was going into Frankie's pocket. She didn't dare accuse Frankie openly or even voice her suspicion, for she knew full well that Mark would set upon him, and she recalled from her own childhood days that nothing was more vicious than family fights. Agnes made a mental note to call up the next day to St. Declan's and speak to the principal. She folded the letter and put it into her apron pocket, and turned her attention to the final letter that arrived that morning. This one had a crest on the envelope, the 3 castles of Dublin. She knew it came from the corporation, though she was a little bit puzzled. The only time she received a letter from Dublin Corporation was when her rent was in arrears. But she was up to date now, and had been for the last year. She ripped open the flap and extracted a very official-looking letter. It read, "Dear Tenant, Dublin Corporation is pleased to announce the implementation of its inner-city renewal plan. The long-term plan is to eradicate the inner-city tenement situation. The plan will be implemented over the next 5 years and will be carried out on a zone-by-zone basis. A map of the zones is available at the Dublin Corporation housing offices for viewing. The area encompassing Lower Gardner Street, Sean McDermott Street West, St. Jarlath Street, James Larkin Court and James Larkin Road is Zone 1. Demolition on this zone will begin in July 1970. Residents will be rehoused in the new ultra-modern suburban housing estates to be built in Cabra, Dublin 7, Finglas, Dublin 11 and Coolock, Dublin 5. Houses and areas have been drawn for families on a lottery basis, and you have drawn 43 Wolftone Grove, Finglas West, Dublin 11. All homes are 2-storey dwellings with 3 bedrooms, 1 reception room, bathroom, toilet and kitchen, front and back gardens. On behalf of the City Manager and Dublin County Council, I wish you good fortune in your new home. Yours sincerely, James Jackson, Housing Officer, Dublin Corporation. Mother of Jesus, Agnes exclaimed. What? We're being turfed out. Turfed out? What do you mean, Ma? Turfed out? Shocked, Agnes looked at Mark. They're knocking down the buildings, and they're sending us down the country. The alarm clock blared at 4 a.m. the next morning. Agnes stretched her arm out and felt around on her bedside locker before landing on the clock to switch it off. She couldn't open her eyes. The lids felt like they were glued together. She had had just 3 hours sleep, having waited up for Frankie until 1 a.m. to try and talk to him. He hadn't arrived by then, so she went to bed. Slowly she rose and reset the alarm for 6:30. On her way to the bathroom, she tiptoed into the boys' room and gently placed the ticking clock beside Mark. The boys now all had a mattress each, thanks to Mark. He had bought some plain deal and webbing from Mr. Wise at wholesale prices, and the boys' room now had 6 built-in bunks, 3 against each wall. All 6 boys were asleep. Agnes had to stretch up a little to look into Frankie's bunk. He was there, sleeping, and her nose tingled at the smell of stale cider. He was also fully clothed. She bit her bottom lip and closed her eyes. And then she sighed deeply and left the room, shutting the door gently behind her. 1 3/4 hours later, Agnes was in Moore Street, throwing up the canvas roof over her stall. Agnes took her break at 10 a.m, leaving Fat Annie to mind the stall. It took her just 5 minutes to walk to Dublin Corporation's housing section in Jervis Street. She was not prepared for the sight that met her when she arrived there. It was absolute bedlam. It seemed that every resident in Zone 1 had arrived simultaneously to protest. The hallways were chock-a-block with people, all chattering and grumbling. Halfway down the hallway, standing beside a bench, was a tall man with silver-grey hair in a suit, shirt and tie, and wearing bifocals. Most of the complaints and abuse seemed to be aimed at him. Agnes recognised Birdie Kerrigan from St. Jarlath Street. The Kerrigans had lived in Dublin's inner city for nigh on 100 years. Birdie looked frightened and confused. "Good morning, Birdie. This is bloody awful," Agnes said to her. "Coolock, Agnes. Fucking Coolock. Where the fuck is Coolock, Agnes?" "I know, love. It's dreadful." Agnes tried to console her, but Birdie went on. "The kids will never find their way home. I can't even fucking spell Coolock." Agnes linked Birdie's arm and patted her on the shoulder, knowing that Birdie couldn't even spell town. But no matter. She understood what Birdie meant. There must have been 100 people there, just like Birdie, panicking and worrying about their future. To the officials in the corporation it was just relocation. But to these people who'd been part of Dublin's inner city for all of their lives, it was akin to deportation. Eventually the silver-haired man in the bifocals stood up on the bench and started stamping his heel. He raised his arms in the air and he cried, "Silence, please! Will everybody please calm down?" Gradually the halls quietened and all heads turned to the corporation man. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Benny Lynch. I'm a placement officer in the housing executive." "Fuck you and the housing executive! We're not moving!" a voice called from the middle of the crowd. This was met with a huge cheer. Again the silver-haired official raised his hands in the air. He was now perspiring, and he wanted to be anywhere but here. But when he had silence again, he went on. "The homes that are being built for you are ultra-modern first-class dwellings." "Good. Then you move to fucking Finglas and leave us alone," a woman cried. Again a huge cheer. The official didn't raise his arms this time, but still silence fell over the crowd. "If you will try to be orderly, I will take all of your names and register your protest. However, I have to tell you this. The decision has been made. Dublin Corporation is set on progress in the city, and the decision is irrevocable." A mumbling started around the crowd. He raised his voice slightly. "But let me say this." Silence came again. "The areas you are being moved out of will be rebuilt with homes, new homes, better homes, more modern homes, and all of you will be entitled to apply to be relocated back in the inner city if you wish. Now this was a surprise announcement and seemed to calm everyone down a bit. How long will it take? A man at the front of the crowd asked. The silver-haired man answered with authority. We expect the houses in Zone 1, your zone, to be ready for occupation in the summer of 1973. That's 3.5 years, for Christ's sake, another woman cried. I know, the official shouted down to her, but this is a huge project, and these things take time. Let's face it, you people cannot go on living the way you are at present. Now, these new homes in Cabra, Finglas and Coolock will have hot running water, gardens and 3 bedrooms. There were mumblings of, we live the way we want, and good enough for our parents, good enough for us. But deep in their heart of hearts, they all knew he was right. And still they held on to the vague promise that they would eventually be moved back into the city centre. The silver-haired man saw he was winning. He should have quit while he was ahead. Instead, he went for one more victory blow. Ladies and gentlemen, progress is a huge machine, and me, I'm just a tool. You can say that again, shouted a little old lady, and the hall burst into nervous laughter. The man's face flushed, and he vanished into an office. The crowd filed out onto the street, and within a couple of minutes they had dispersed. Like it or not, come July, Agnes Browne and family were moving to Finglas. Sean McHugh was 68 years of age. His wife, Poppy, was 67. He had 2 children, Michael and Sheila, and both had emigrated long ago. Michael was a truck driver in Boston, Massachusetts, and Sheila was a supervisor in a plastics factory in Maidstone in London. Sean had married Poppy in a hurry in 1921 in St. John's Lane Church. Not because she was pregnant, but because he thought for sure he was going to die. He fought on the Michael Collins side in the Civil War, and nobody was more relieved than he when it ended in 1922. Sean had joined the Free State Army for a short time, but after 4 years he'd had enough of it all, and in 1927 he went on the dole. He picked up some part-time jobs here and there over the next 6 years, but in 1933 he went back to work as a general factory help for a middle-aged Jewish Austrian man who had just come to Ireland. Benjamin Wiseman was 33 years of age when he landed in Dunleary in 1933. He immediately shortened his name to Wise. It had been a long, tough journey, and his wife Anna had spent the 3 weeks that they'd travelled fussing over their son Manny. Manny was just 10 years old and treated Anna like a servant rather than his mother. Benjamin disliked the boy and was often dismayed that as a father he should feel this way about his son. But Manny just took and took and took, and Anna gave and gave until she had no more to give. In September 1944, 2 weeks before Manny's 21st birthday, Anna passed away. Manny had been living in England for just under a year at that stage. He did not come home for the funeral. Manny was a schmuck. As Sean sat now in the foreman's office in Wise's, he wondered to himself where the 27 years had gone since he first walked in that door. He was also worried. Over the last 5 years, business at Wise's had taken a nosedive. Now Sean held in his hand a letter from Smith & Blythe Distributors in England, Wise's biggest customer. Gregory Smith stated that he would be in Dublin this coming Monday and that he would like to sit down and have a serious talk with Mr. Wise. He placed the letter in the open ledger on his desk. He looked at his watch and realised it was tea break time. He stood and walked to the door of his office, picking up his whistle on the way. He stepped just outside the door and blew the whistle 3 times, very loudly. The machines began to wind down, and within 30 seconds the factory was quiet as the workers filed into the canteen to make tea and eat their sandwiches. As he was about to step back into his office, he heard in the distance the tap, tap, tap of somebody still working, down at the far right-hand corner of the factory. He smiled to himself. He knew who it was. He headed off down the factory floor, picking up odd pieces of wood here and there, putting them in the bin, until he rounded the corner and behind a pile of hardwood saw the back of Mark Brown's head. He walked over to where the young man was working. "Didn't you hear the whistle, Mark?" He spoke to the back of Mark's head. Mark turned and smiled at him. "I did, Mr. McHugh, but it's okay. I have my sandwiches here. I'll have them when I'm working. I'm not really a tea man, if you know what I mean." Sean dug his large hands into the pockets of his dungarees. "Christ, Mark, if I had 10 like you, I'd put this factory back on its feet." "Thanks, Mr. McHugh." "Well, that's okay, son. I really mean it." Sean began to walk away, then stopped and turned back to the boy. He suddenly had a notion. Mark? Mark looked up. He had 3 pin nails in his mouth, but still managed to answer. Yes, Mr. McHugh? I'd like you to do something with me on Monday. Sean McHugh then spent the next 20 minutes telling Mark the situation at Wise's, explaining who Smith and Bly were and how important they were to the future of the business. Sean felt that if somebody young went along to this meeting, then Smith and Bly might regain a little bit of confidence in Wise's, seeing some new blood. He didn't know if it would work, but it was worth a try. So, what do you think, Mark? Will you do it? Well, yeah, sure, Mr. McHugh, if you think it'll help. But I've never been to a meeting before. What'll I wear? Sean laughed and patted the boy in the back. A shirt and tie will be fine, Mark. A shirt and tie? OK, then. Sean went back to his office, a little lighter on his feet, and for some reason that he couldn't explain to himself, his heart a little happier. Mark placed 3 more nails in his mouth, stooped down on the roll-top desk he was working on, and said to himself, where the fuck will I get a shirt and tie? Tea time in the Browne household was story time in many ways, and each of the children fought for time to tell the highlight of their day. Catty was all hyped up because there was to be a go-kart race down Summer Hill in a week's time, and she and Catty Dowdle were going to be in it. They won't let yous in. Yous are girls, Dermot stated. So? Catty asked. Well, that's it. Yous are girls. Girls don't go into go-kart races. Dermot knew about these things. Catty folded her arms in front of her and sat back in the chair staring at Dermot. Says who? She demanded. Dermot thought for a moment. There's a rule somewhere. There has to be. Well, there's not, and me and Catty Dowdle are going into the race, and what's more, we're going to win it. Agnes placed a full teapot on the table and said, Good girl, Catty. Who's pushing? I am. I was thinking so. That Catty Dowdle one would be too cute to have you sitting in the go-kart and her pushing. The lazy bitch. No, but I want to push, Ma. I love pushing, and I'm the fastest pusher in the Jarrow. Good girl, Catty. Mark joined in and winked at her. As she poured out more tea for the boys, Agnes asked, as offhand as she could, Was Frankie home this afternoon? Dermot was the one that answered, very quietly. He simply said, No. Catty piped up, I seen him today round the back of the shops. Him and 5 other skinheads, smoking and drinking cider, Ma. Mark leaned across and placed his hand on Catty's arm. Shh. Nobody likes a snitch, Catty. Back at the cooker, Agnes pretended she hadn't heard Catty's remark. Before anyone had time to react to what Catty had said, Trevor strolled into the kitchen. Look, Ma, he called out. He was holding 10 new paintings he had done that day. He trotted over to the table and placed them on Mark's lap, saying, Here, Marco. Mark feigned surprise. Are these for me? Wow. Thanks very much, Trevor. You're a great boy. And he bent over and kissed the boy on the forehead. He then began to flick through the pictures. They're very good, Trevor. Agnes decided to add more accolades. Well done, Trev. Sure, you're a great boy. No, but they really are very good, Ma. Look, said Mark, holding up 2 of the pictures. Agnes looked at the pictures and smiled. Yeah, they are very good, but Jesus, I hope the teacher isn't going to be spending all her time teaching him painting. That'll be no good to him, unless she teaches him a bit of wallpaper hanging as well. The children all laughed. It was a welcome reprieve from the Frankie subject. When tea was over, the family began to disperse. Simon and Dermot to the boys' bedroom to do their homework, Catty to the room she shared with her mother to do press-ups. Trevor lay on the floor in the sitting room watching TV. No homework for him. 10 paintings a day was his limit. There was just Agnes and Mark left at the tea table. I'm heading out to the bingo, Mark. Listen, Rory's dinner is on the pot with a lid over it. If he's not in by 7:45, turn the heat off underneath the pot. Sure, Ma. I need a shirt and tie. Oh, Jesus, Mark, you're not in court, are you? No, I'm not. Mr. McHugh wants me to go to a meeting with him on Monday. A meeting? For what? What kind of a meeting? While Agnes sipped her tea and lit yet another cigarette, Mark told her the story of his encounter that day with Sean McHugh. So now I need a bleeding shirt and tie, he ended. I'll go down to Cleary's with you tomorrow. Do you know, Mark, it's no harm. You could do with a bit of decent gear. We'll get you the whole works. Shirt, shoes, tie, jacket, pants, the lot. Steady, Ma, I'm only going to wear them for the day. They won't go to waste, love. Every man should have some good gear to wear. The word man just slipped out, but Mark noticed it, and he was very proud. Agnes stood up and began to clear off the table. "Leave those, Ma. I'll do them. You go on to the bingo." "Ah, you're a sweetheart, love." Agnes gathered her cigarettes and dropped them into her bingo bag, put on her coat, kissed all the children goodbye, and left for bingo. "Top of the house, 90. There was a tremor in Agnes's voice as she made the announcement to the group. "That's it. I have a weight." "I don't believe you. What is it?" asked Carmel. "Believe it or not, it's number 7 again." "Again? Jesus," groaned Nellie. 1 and 4, 14. "There's still a good 6 or 7 calls to go yet, Agnes." Carmel nudged her in the ribs. "On its own, number 7. It was hard to tell at first who had actually won. Nellie, Carmel, Splish Splash, Agnes, and even Bunny simultaneously rose to their feet and screamed, "Check!" Slightly behind Agnes, and over to the left-hand side of the hall, a similar thing was taking place as another group of 4 or 5 also screamed check. Pat Muldoon switched off his ball machine and announced, "We seem to have a number of checks in the hall. Would everybody except the checkers please sit down, and would the checkers please hold their card in the air?" When the room had settled, there were 2 people left standing in the hall. Agnes looked across the room at the other checker. She knew her. It was Pauline Dunn, and she too was from the Jarrow. She had 5 children, 2 of them grown up, and 3 youngsters, and her husband had fecked off 5 or 6 years previously with the cleaner from Foley's pub. They'd gone to England. It was the talk of the area at the time. Pauline had just carried on and made a few bob for herself by filling the gap the young girl had left in Foley's, where Pauline was now a valued member of staff. Both women were shaking. Agnes smiled nervously at Pauline, and Pauline returned the smile along with a little wave. Both checks were adjudged to be correct, and the record snowball of £620 was divided equally between the 2 women. To the delight of Agnes's group, the bingo organisers also gave a £5 note to each of the 5 in Agnes's group and to the 5 people sitting around Pauline Dunn as a winning bonus. The smoked cod and chips never tasted as good as they did that night on the walk back to 92 James Larkin Court. And as if in repayment for the £5 notes, the entire group left Agnes to her front door to ensure that she got home safely. She invited them in for a cup of tea, but they all declined. As soon as she entered the flat, she put the kettle on and sneaked into the boys' bedroom. She noticed Frankie's bunk was empty. Then she leaned into the middle bunk and shook Mark. "Mark, Mark, love, wake up." Mark woke gently. He had his back to her, so he had to look over his shoulder to see who was shaking him. Once he recognised his mother, he turned slowly. "Mammy, are you all right?" "I'm grand, love. Come out to the kitchen. I want to show you something." "Is Frankie in trouble?" No, nothing like that. I just want to show you something. Something good." Mark was still a bit groggy when he came into the kitchen, though his eyes were opened wide when he saw the 6 huge £50 notes and the tenner spread across the table. He froze and stared at them. Then it dawned on him. "You won the fucking snowball." "Mind your language." "Sorry, Ma. Congratulations." He took her in his arms, and snuggling his nose between her earlobe and her neck, he squeezed her tightly. Agnes closed her eyes and thought, he might look like a man, he might talk like a man, but he still hugged her like a child. Mark sat down and began to drink the tea his mother had made. For a while the 2 just stared in silence at the money. £310. Yeah. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know. You don't think I've been just sitting around planning how to spend the snowball, do you?" They heard the letterbox open, and both of them looked at the door. Frankie's nicotine-stained fingers poked in and wrapped around the piece of wool that held the door key. Slowly the key began to rise until it disappeared out the letterbox. Quickly Agnes gathered up the money and moved to the sink where her handbag was. She had the money put away and the handbag snapped shut before the front door opened. Frankie closed the door and pulled the key back in through the letterbox. As he entered the kitchen, he was a bit startled to find Agnes and Mark sitting drinking tea. Agnes looked him straight in the face. Mark turned his head away and looked at his mug of tea. "What's up?" Frankie asked. There was a touch of a slur in his words. Agnes seized the opportunity. I tell you what's up, son. The game is up. For you." "What do you mean?" "You've been expelled from school." "Big deal. So what?" Mark's head snapped up from his tea. Don't speak to Mammy like that. His voice was even, but firm. Frankie held Mark's gaze for a few moments, then backed down. Skinhead or not, Frankie had no intention of mixing it with the biggest 17-year-old in the Jarrow. He began to shift from leg to leg uneasily. I hated that school anyway. The teachers picked on me every chance they got. Well, from the amount of times you've been in school, they've had precious little chance. Mark went back to staring at his tea. He had often seen Agnes give Frankie a dressing down before. Sometimes he felt they were just for his benefit. A kind of mock telling off. Frankie would apologise and tomorrow it would be all forgotten. Frankie would then return to doing his own thing in his own way until the next dressing down. Agnes lit a cigarette. As she blew out the match and placed it in the ashtray, Frankie went to walk past the kitchen table to the bedroom. "Where are you going?" Agnes asked him. He stopped and half-turned. "To bed," he replied in a tone that suggested she shouldn't be asking him such stupid questions. "Well, I'm not finished yet." Frankie turned back to face his mother. "Go on, then," he said, ready now to endure the rest of the routine. "Here's the deal, Francis." Now she looked him straight in the eye. "Now that you're out of school, you have 2 weeks to get yourself a job and start bringing in some money to this house." "Or else?" Frankie asked, trying to hurry things up. "I'll tell you or else, mister. Or else you find yourself somewhere else to live." Slowly, Mark raised his head from his mug of tea to look at his mother. He couldn't believe his ears, but he knew from the look on her face that she was deadly serious. "You wouldn't." "You just fucking watch me." The next day, Saturday, as promised, Agnes took Mark down to Cleary's. Having never bought a suit for himself before, Mark, of course, didn't know which way to look or what to try. Agnes herself couldn't be described as a slave to fashion, but from her dates with Pierre, she'd picked up enough from looking at how he dressed to know what looked good on a man. She chose a white cotton tailor-fit shirt, a pair of beige cavalry twill trousers, a grey and wine striped tie, what can only be described as a double-breasted blazer in the style of the Beatles with its high, upturned wing-style collar. It was wine with gold buttons. Agnes insisted on paying for the ensemble, and the lot cost her just over £35. Mark argued with her, insisting that he pay the bill as he had over £60 saved. But Agnes stuck to her guns, delighted to treat Mark to his first business meeting outfit. However, she did let him pay for the shoes. He chose a pair of all-leather blackthorn brogues, which alone cost £11. Meanwhile, up in Henry Street, young Dermot was doing a little bit of shopping of his own. Just a bit of gear he needed to keep his wardrobe up to date. Unlike Mark with his savings, or Agnes with her bingo win, Dermot hadn't a penny to his name. He was out for an afternoon's shoplifting. He decided on a pair of navy blue corduroy trousers and arnotts. His plan is simple. He wandered through the store for about 30 minutes before stealing his first item. This would be an empty brown paper bag with the words Arnott's Department Store Dublin written across it. Armed with this, he went to the boys' section where he picked out a pair of brown corduroy trousers in his own size, 26-inch waist. Dermot was an independent shopper. He had his own methods. He folded the trousers carefully and slipped them into the Arnott's bag, and then made his way straight to the security man. Dermot tipped the man on the arm, and the security man turned around to see a small, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy with a babyish smile who looked like an innocent 12-year-old. "Excuse me, mister, are you the manager?" Dermot asked, full of innocence. No, I'm the store security, son. What do you want the manager for?" Dermot opened the bag to reveal the folded pair of brown corduroy trousers. He looked into the bag himself and held it open for the security man to peep in also. "It's these, mister," he said. The man looked into the bag and was a little confused. "Oh, what about them?" "Me mammy got them this morning, and they should be blue, not brown, and she sent me up to change them." "Oh, come with me, son," the security man spoke as if he were the manager. He walked Dermot up to one of the cash points at the men's and boys' section and drew one of the young ladies aside. Excuse me, love, if you've got time, would you look after him for me? I've got to get back to the door." "Sure, Tom. What is it, dear?" Dermot proffered the bag. "I need to change these to navy." "Certainly, dear. Do you have a receipt?" "Daddy said I didn't need a receipt." "Daddy?" "Yes, Daddy." Dermot now pointed at the retreating security man. "Oh, you're Tom's little boy." Dermot opened his blue eyes as wide as he could, smiled, and nodded his head. "Of course, dear. Come along with me. So tell me, which one are you, Barry or John?" "Barry," Dermot lied, and very convincingly. After leaving Cleary's, both pretty pleased with themselves, Agnes and Mark crossed the street to the GPO and began to stroll up Henry Street to do some window shopping. They talked about Rory and how well he was doing at Wash and Blow. Mark told his mother how excited he was about attending the meeting this coming Monday with Mr. McHugh, and yet how frightened he was at the same time. They discussed the move to Finglas and what it would mean to the family. They even talked about the two Cathy's chances of winning the go-kart race the following Saturday. They talked about everything and anything, except Frankie. As they passed the entrance to Arnott's upstairs cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and freshly cooked pastries wafted out the door. Said Agnes. "Do you fancy a coffee, Mark?" Yeah, sure, Ma. Well, tea, actually." And up the stairs they went. Agnes took the shopping bags from Mark as he went to the self-service counter to get the drinks and cakes. She wandered around the seating area looking for a table where they could have a little bit of privacy. Not easy to find on a Saturday afternoon. She eventually settled on a side booth. She placed the bags on the bench seat on the right-hand side and slid herself into the bench seat on the left side. From where Agnes sat, she had a fine view of the store. Boy, it is busy, she thought. There were people milling in every direction. It was the little blonde head bobbing along the racks that caught her eye. That tends to happen when you have 7 children and 5 of them are blonde. She followed the head with her eyes as it bobbed along the rail of Holy Communion jackets. Then, as the figure emerged, she could clearly see that it was indeed her own little Dermot. He was chatting away to one of the sales assistants, and they seemed to be getting on great. Just then Mark arrived with the tray. "Here we go, Ma. I got you a chocolate eclair and I got a cream slice for myself." "Mark, isn't that our Dermot down there in the boys' section?" Mark placed one knee on the bench seat and stretched over the balcony to look down. "Where, Ma? I don't see anything." Agnes now stood and pointed over to the boys' section. "There, look, talking to the young one." "Oh, Janie, yeah, that's Dermot, all right." "What's he doing in here? And what's in that bag he's carrying?" Mark had a sinking feeling, and his stomach tightened. He tried to think as quickly as he could. I don't know. Oh, yeah, he said something earlier about going down to Henry Street for a message for Mrs. Egan. Maybe that's it. Agnes was still looking down at Dermot. "Must be. A fair play to him. He's a good lad. He'd do a run for anyone." The girl had been most helpful. She obviously liked Tom, and his son got the red carpet treatment. Dermot thanked the lady and again made his way back to Tom, the security man. He tugged his jacket. Tom turned around again. "Well, son, did you get fixed up?" Tom asked. "Yes, mister. Thanks very much." As he said this, Dermot glanced back at the sales lady. As he suspected, she was staring directly at the pair of them. Dermot looked up at the security man and said, "Mister, can I tell you a secret?" The security man smiled. "Course you can, son," and he stooped over. Dermot placed his arms around the man's neck and whispered in his ear, "I still wet the bed." The man looked straight into the boy's face, puzzled, and then replied, "That's no harm, son. You'll grow out of that." And he patted Dermot on the head. From where the sales assistant was standing, it looked like Tom had just received a hug and kiss from his son. She was touched. Dermot once again looked in her direction, and still she stood, looking at the pair. Dermot said to Tom, pointing to the girl, "That girl was really nice." Tom looked in the direction of Dermot's pointed finger, and then Dermot waved at the girl. The girl waved back, and for some reason, unknown to himself, Tom waved. Tom then got back to business. "Okay, son, you're fixed up. Now, off you go." Dermot started to move away, then turned and said, "Thanks a lot," and then to himself he added, "Daddy." He laughed, and he left the store richer by one pair of corduroy trousers. Agnes gave Mark a running commentary on the whole scene. Mark didn't look. He couldn't bear to look. "He's leaving your woman now. Jesus, you think they were best friends. Now he's talking to the bloody security man." Mark paled. Did the security man call him over? "No, Dermot just walked straight over to him." "Jesus." "What?" "He's hugging the security man." "Well, maybe he knows him, Ma." "Jesus, Mark, I know the girl at the checkout in Power Supermarket, but you won't see me hugging her." She tugged Mark's sleeve.
You have to see this, Mark. Your woman is waving down the shop and Dermot and the security man are waving back. It's like something out of The Sound of Bleeding Music.
Mark couldn't take any more of this. He knelt up in the seat. Where are they, Ma? Agnes turned back to her coffee.
Too late, love. He's gone. I wonder what that was all about.
I wonder, Mark said, and went back to his cream bun and tea, relieved in the knowledge that Dermot hadn't been caught. Yet. Saturday evening after tea, the Browne household was very busy as everybody rushed to prepare for the night's entertainment. Since he had begun working and got his very first wage packet, Rory had taken Dermot and Simon to the pictures every Saturday evening. Every second Saturday night, Cathy would go down to Cathy Dowdall's flat and stay overnight with her. On alternate Saturday nights, the two would stay in Browne's. Tonight it was Cathy Browne's turn to travel a couple of blocks down the road, so she was packing her toothbrush and nightie. Agnes had her bath and got herself ready for her weekly date with Pierre. What had got off to a rocky start 3 years ago had now become a firm friendship of sorts. They held hands and often kissed fondly, but it always ended there. There was absolutely no sex. In fairness to Pierre, it wasn't for the want of trying, and Agnes came close a couple of times, but something always went wrong at the last minute, and Agnes would chicken out. It was also a question of facilities. Pierre still shared the living accommodation above his uncle's pizza parlour with his uncle and two cousins, so they couldn't go there. And needless to say, a few quiet moments in the Browne home was absolutely out of the question. This reduced the possibilities to Pierre's car, a Fiat 127, no chance, or booking into a hotel room. And this they had tried once. It was a newly opened hotel in Drumcondra, the Skylawn. Pierre suggested that he and Agnes have a drink there to see what it was like, and he also told her that when they got there, he would have a surprise for her. For the life of her, Agnes couldn't think what the surprise would be, so she arrived at the hotel with Pierre, full of anticipation and not a little excited. When Pierre revealed what the surprise was, that he had booked a room in the hotel for the night, Agnes was shocked, at first. But after 3 bottles of cider, she thought the idea hilarious, and began to rib Pierre for even thinking of it. 3 more bottles of cider, and Agnes was now becoming a little amorous. She wasn't so sure that this might not be a good idea. It took just 1 more bottle to convince her. Pierre was thrilled.
When you finish that bottle, we will go upstairs, yes? Don't be ridiculous, Pierre, Agnes snapped. But, my darling, I thought you said yes. I did say yes, but we can't make it that obvious. Well, then, what shall we do, my darling?
Agnes thought for a moment and came up with a plan.
I'll go into the ladies' toilet. When I'm gone in, you go up to the room on your own, like you were a businessman going to bed. Then when I come out of the toilets, I'll finish me glass of cider, and I'll go into the lift and go up to the room.
Pierre thought about this for a moment, and although he thought it was silly, and whether in France and Agnes a Frenchwoman it would have been, he was prepared to go along with any plan as long as it meant getting Agnes up to that room.
Okay, my darling, the room is 213 on floor 2. Gotcha, 213 on floor 2.
Pierre stood and stretched his arms, and looking around gave an exaggerated yawn, then quite loudly announced,
Oh dear, I am such a tired businessman, I think I shall go to bed.
Agnes looked at him aghast.
What are you doing, you gobshite? You're not in a play. Just fuck off to bed, will you?
Quickly and without reply, Pierre scurried out of the lounge and into the lift. Agnes, in the meantime, headed for the ladies' toilet. She felt a little woozy, so she went to the sink and splashed cold water on her face. This freshened her up a bit, but it also removed some of her makeup, so she reapplied the war paint, then, satisfied with her reflection, she left the ladies and went back to her drink. As she was drinking, her eyes moved from right to left around the room, and when the glass was empty, she very casually rose, steadily and very nonchalantly walked to the lift. She pressed a button and entered. The doors closed, and Agnes looked at the numbered floor buttons. Aloud she said, Now, 213 on the first floor, no. On the second floor, or was it 321? Jesus, what's the number? Suddenly the lift doors slid open, and Agnes jumped with fright. An American gentleman stepped in and asked, Going up?
Getting out,
replied Agnes, and she left in a hurry. She returned to her seat and tried to think what to do next. The waitress came over and Agnes ordered another bottle of cider. 15 minutes later, while Agnes was still sitting in the lounge sipping her glass of cider, the phone behind the bar rang. The barman picked it up.
Hello, bar? Hello. I wonder could you do me a favour? Certainly, son, if I can. Sitting in the lounge is a very beautiful, dark-haired lady. The barman looked around. Yes, sir. I can see her from here. Good. Would you ask her to join Pierre in his room? That's room 213, as soon as she is ready. Well, sir, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to... But Pierre interrupted him. No, I understand, but this is okay. The lady is expecting this call. The barman thought about it for a moment and then said, Well, okay, sir. I'll tell the lady. Agnes watched the barman as he spoke on the phone. Suddenly he was looking around the lounge. He then stooped down to go out of the hatch beneath the bar into the lounge proper. He walked straight over towards Agnes. When he got about 5 feet from her, he nodded and smiled. She nodded and smiled back, and he walked straight past her. The barman carried on to another table just a little bit away from where Agnes was sitting. He sat down and spoke to a dark-haired woman. Whatever he was saying made the lady look very serious. Then she smiled, thanked him, put her cigarettes and lighter into a handbag, and left the lounge. Agnes then lost interest. She had finally figured out what to do. She would go out to the reception desk and simply ask what room Mr. Pierre Douglas was residing in. She finished the last of her cider and made her way out. The receptionist, although very friendly, explained that it was not hotel policy to give out room numbers on request. But, she said, she could put Agnes through on the phone to Mr. Douglas's room. Agnes was happy with this, and the lady pointed to a phone booth across the lobby in which Agnes could take the call. Agnes entered the booth and closed the door. She sat on the small stool, and suddenly the white phone in front of her burst into life. She picked up the phone. The receptionist said, "You're through to that room now." Agnes thanked her. There was a slight click, and she heard the phone ringing. It rang and rang and rang. There was no reply. Agnes let it ring until the receptionist eventually cut in and announced, "I'm sorry, there's no reply from that room." Again Agnes thanked her and replaced the receiver. She sat for a moment, wondering what to do next. Then through the glass door of the booth she saw Pierre being led through the lobby in handcuffs by female detective Jacinta Doody of the Dublin Metropolitan Vice Squad. The case never came to court, and Pierre was let off with a very stiff warning. As she checked herself over in the mirror for this Saturday night's date, Agnes giggled to herself in the memory of that most eventful evening. Apart from Trevor, the only member of the Browne household who wasn't going out that night was Mark. Mark would stay in and babysit Trevor, as he did every Saturday night. Agnes often worried about Mark's lack of social life, but figured that Mark would do his own thing when he was ready. As it turned out, her date that night would be a short one, as Pierre had to get back to the pizza parlour early to help his uncle with the after-pub rush. Agnes wasn't too disappointed, because she would be home in time to see the last half, and usually the best part, of the Late Late Show. When Trevor had finally gone off to sleep, Mark opened up his textbooks and began to study for his upcoming test. Tonight he was reading about the use of pulpwoods in the manufacture of furniture. Plywoods, blockboard, chipboard were becoming the base materials in the upholstered furniture manufacturing business. "This is of no use to me," thought Mark. He likened it to learning Irish language in school. So much effort went into learning something he would not be using once school was over. Wise & Company specialised in hardwood and leather furniture. This was Mark's forte. Still, he had to study this area because there would be questions on it in the test. "No knowledge ever goes to waste," Mr. Wise had said to him, even though Mr. Wise was the one who scoffed at the idea of pulpwood frames for furniture. But Mark's thoughts were not totally on plywoods. He couldn't get Betty Collins off his mind. On the way back from their shopping trip that day, Agnes had suggested that Mark take the new pants up to Maggie Collins in Gardner Row. Maggie had been a seamstress in her younger years and now made a steady few bob by doing alterations from her home. Mark's pants were about an inch too long, and Maggie, Agnes told him, would take them up in a jiffy. He found the building, number 32, easily. Maggie had the ground floor flat, and as he knocked on the door, Mark could hear the mechanical rat-tat-tat of the Singer sewing machine from behind the door. The door was opened by a woman of about 40, with hair dyed platinum blonde. "I need a pair of trousers taken up," Mark said, without introducing himself. "Come in, son," Maggie invited, and stood back to allow Mark to enter. He stepped into the flat. Despite the fact that Maggie herself had opened the door and was now standing before him, Mark could still hear the sewing machine busily working away in an adjoining room. There was a beautiful aroma in the flat that could only come from sausages frying. "Show me the pants, love." Maggie took the bag. She unfolded the pants and looked at the bottom of the legs. Turnips. Betty! Mark jumped. Suddenly the machine in the other room stopped. The door opened and out walked Maggie's daughter, Betty. Yeah? Betty asked, not looking at Mark. Pair of pants with turnips. Run them up, love, will you? I'm in the middle of the dinner. She threw the pants to the young girl. Betty still hadn't looked at Mark, but Mark had not taken his eyes off her. She was tall for a girl, only just shorter than Mark, though she was about 2 years older at 19. She had dark skin, brown eyes, and the most beautiful white teeth Mark had ever seen. This was not the first time Mark had laid eyes on Betty Collins. Up to 3 years ago, Mark would often see her at the parish hall. He would be doing his football training in the waste ground beside the hall, and she would arrive dressed in the black beret and suit of the Irish Red Cross. What stunned him at this moment was that at that time Betty Collins seemed to be one of the least attractive girls he'd ever seen. Now she stood there, a vision of beauty. She looked at him. Oh, it's you. Hi, Mark. She smiled. Yeah, how are you? Well, what's your leg measurement? Me leg? Why? The girl laughed. I have to know how much to take up. Oh, I don't know. They just need about that much. Mark held up his hand, with finger and thumb about an inch apart. She shrieked with laughter, and from her back pockets took a rolled-up measuring tape. Now she blushed. She unrolled the tape and fingered it for a moment. Then she quickly vanished into the kitchen. Mark shoved his hands into his pockets and shuffled his feet. The sound of the two women mumbling was followed by a loud laugh from Maggie. Seconds later, Maggie came from the kitchen with a cigarette butt in her mouth, holding the measuring tape. Right, son. Open your legs. Mark did. Coughing and laughing simultaneously, Maggie measured the inside leg at 34 inches. From where he stood waiting for the trousers, Mark could see in through the half-open door. Betty rocked forward each time she ran the material through the machine. She was wearing a tartan men's shirt with sleeves rolled up, the front tail hanging over her jeans. The top 3 buttons of the shirt were open, and each time she bent forward, Mark caught sight of the top of her breast and the lacy rim of a snow-white bra. He felt warm and clammy, his heart thumped, and his stomach heaved. Yet he didn't want to be anywhere else in the world. The short collar around Mark's neck felt tight and agitated him. He'd already endured the wolf whistles of the early morning elwins sweeping down their steps of their buildings as he walked through the Jarrow. He had tried to hold a steady smile, but knew that his face was so red it nearly matched a wine-coloured jacket. It was Mary Cullen who spotted him first, and she attracted the attention of 2 other neighbours, Mrs. Williams and Mrs. Troy. Hey, girls! Would you look who it is? Michael fucking Caine! What's it all about, Alfie? The other 2 women screamed with laughter and joined in the jeers. Hey, Mark! Would you risk it for the biscuit? Go on now with that, Mark Browne. Mrs. Troy joined in. Wiggle your arse when you go by us, you fine thing. Finally, he was outside the Gresham Hotel, his stomach churning with a mixture of nerves and excitement. At last he caught sight of Sean McHugh as he waddled his way up O'Connell Street. The bald, short man with the stumpy legs and an arse as big as a doormat met Mark with a beaming smile. Well, if it isn't Paul Newman, Sean chuckled. Stop, Mr. McHugh. I feel ridiculous. Well, you look great. Just like a proper executive, young Mr. Browne. They crossed the lobby of the hotel. Sean McHugh was glancing from table to table. 2 gentlemen in suits sitting at a table just outside the restaurant door stood up, and the older of the 2 men waved in their direction. Mark poked Sean. Over there, Mr. McHugh. Is that them? Sean returned the wave enthusiastically and advanced towards the 2 men. He took the older man's hand firmly and with genuine warmth in his voice said, Greg, good to see you. Welcome to Dublin. He turned back to Mark. Greg, I'd like you to meet Mark Browne, one of the new young bloods in Wise & Company. Mark, this is Greg Smith, managing director of our longest-standing customer, Smith & Bloy. As he said this, Sean looked straight into the eyes of Greg Smith. Greg was uncomfortable. The younger man with him was introduced as Frank Reel, accountant for Smith & Bloy. The 4 sat down, and while Greg and Sean exchanged a little banter, mostly concerning Mr. Wise's health, the accountant waved to a waitress to order some refreshments. Greg Smith and his accountant were like a double act. They spoke uninterrupted for 20 minutes. Mark had phrases like market forces, purchasing fluctuations, expendability, volume selling, none of which he understood.
He did understand the thrust of where these two men were leading them. Wise and Company were about to lose a customer. Not once, Mark noted, did he ever hear the words quality, class, or reliability. These were 3 words Mr. Wise had taught Mark in his very first week that were the essence of good furniture. At the end of the speech there was a very short pause, and the 2 men looked at each other. Then Greg eventually said, "So you can see, Sean, that we can no longer carry on the way we are. I deeply regret having to do this, but we will not be placing any more orders with Wise and Company." He opened a folder and took out a white envelope which he handed to Sean. "This, I believe, will bring our account up to date." "I'm sorry, Sean," and he sounded genuinely sorry. Sean just nodded and placed the envelope in his inside pocket. He exhaled a deep sigh and was obviously about to speak, but before he could, Mark interjected with, "Why not?" Greg Smith looked at Mark as if he had seen him for the very first time. "I beg your pardon?" Mark looked at Sean to see if he was upsetting him in any way by taking part in the conversation. Sean's face was expressionless, so Mark returned his gaze to Greg Smith. "Why will you not be placing any more orders with us?" It was the accountant who answered. "Mark, nobody wants expensive furniture anymore. Today's furniture has nearly become disposable. People nowadays want to be able to change their furniture as often as they change their wallpaper. So the new trend is not quality hand-carved leather chairs that are expensive. It's colourful, modern 3-piece suites that are cheap. That's the way the market's going. That's the way we've got to go." Mark didn't answer, but nodded his understanding. The 2 older men stood up, indicating that the meeting was over. They all shook hands, and Sean and Mark left the Gresham. As they walked slowly down O'Connell Street, Mark said, "You knew that was coming, didn't you?" "Aye." "Is losing Smith and Bly really bad for us?" "Really bad, Mark. It could be the final straw." They walked in silence for a couple of 100 yards. Then Sean sighed and said, "I'm not looking forward to telling Mr. Wise." Mark stopped and put his arm on Sean McHugh's shoulder. "Then don't tell him. Mr. McHugh, don't tell him." "What, should I have to?" "Not yet. Just give me 1 day before you tell him, please, Mr. McHugh. I have an idea." Sean looked into Mark's face, and in Mark's eyes he saw something familiar. There was a fire of defiance, a refusal to believe that no matter how bad the situation was, that it couldn't be changed. Sean McHugh had seen it before, twice. The first time was in the eyes of his hero and Commander-in-Chief, Michael Collins. The second time was in 1933, in the eyes of a much younger Mr. Wise. Quietly, Sean said, "OK." Mark smiled. "You go back to the factory. I'll be back a bit later. I've got to go and see me mammy first." Agnes was more than surprised to see Mark suddenly standing at her stall on the other side of the rosy red apples. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Mummy." "Is there something up at one of the Chisellers?" No, Ma, no, nothing like that. Have you a minute?" The other stall holders were screaming, "Yoo-hoo! Who's the fine thing down there, Agnes?" Winnie the Mackerel yelled across, "Hey, Mark, you bleeding riot! Take me, I'm yours!" She rolled her eyes. This was greeted with a howl of laughter around the stalls. Not that anyone in their right mind would ever dream in a moment of insanity of taking Winnie the Mackerel, for Winnie the Mackerel was only short of a white tooth for a snooker set. Agnes let out a roar at them. "Go on out of that, you're embarrassing the chap." But she really was pleased at the reaction and proud of her son, who in his new outfit could have been a film star out of Hollywood. She smiled at Mark. "Come on around this side of the stall, love, and we'll have a chat." Mark made his way around to the back of the stall, and Agnes pulled up the empty case for him to sit on. She sat on her milk crate. "So, what's up, love?" "I need to borrow £50 off you, Ma." £50? Jesus! Am I allowed to ask what it's for?" "Of course you are, but honestly, Ma, if I was to take the time to tell you the whole story, the 2 of us would have beards." Quickly he gave her the broad outline of the situation. "The bottom line is, Ma, I'm going to try something that I hope will help Mr. Wise hang on to the valuable customer. Now, I have £50 myself, but I need another 50 to get what I need." Mark waited. Agnes asked no more questions. In his 17 years, Mark had never asked Agnes for 1 single penny. Mind you, to start with £50 was a bit of a shocker, but her faith and trust in the young man was infinite. She delved into her handbag and withdrew a £50 note. Mark's eyes opened wide. "Jesus, Ma, I didn't expect you to have it here now.
Don't tell me you're carrying that money around with you all the time. No, I just put that 50 in me bag. It makes me feel good, walking around town with 50 quid in your bag. It's a nice feeling. I have the rest hid at home in one of me suede boots in the wardrobe. Good, and keep it hid. Mark took the £50 note, kissed his mother on the cheek, and was off about his very important business. He went to the Browne flat in James Larkin Court, where he picked up his own £50. He took out a blank workpad and pencil and spent his morning sketching page after page. In a few hours, he had finished 3 different designs for 3 suites of furniture. "We should use a rope," Cathy Browne said. She was sitting on the tiny wall that surrounded Mountjoy Square, using the railings as a backrest. She had her elbows on her knees and her head was cupped in her hands. She was wearing a serious look of contemplation as she stared at the go-kart. Written on the side of the cart was "Flippin' Flyer." Sitting beside her in an identical pose was her best friend and driver, Catty Dowdall. "Nah, I'll use me fee. I'm better steering with me fee." "I'll tell you what," Cathy Browne stood up. "We'll try one run with the rope, and then we'll try one with your fee, and we'll see which is the fastest, OK?" Catty Dowdall was impressed with this suggestion, and between them they began fixing the rope to the front axle. When it was firmly in place, they pulled the cart over to the top of Fitzgibbon Street, the site of next Saturday's go-kart race. The course would run from the traffic lights to a white chalk line that would be drawn just past the Fitzgibbon Street police station. Catty Dowdall climbed on board and gripped the rope tightly, lacing it through her fingers as if she were holding the reins of a thoroughbred stallion. Cathy Browne stood behind her, hands placed firmly on the other Catty's shoulders and a look of fierce concentration on her face, like she was going to have a shite any minute. "Ready, steady, go!" Catty Dowdall screamed, and with a huge grunt Cathy Browne launched the cart. Flippin' Flyer was living up to its name and making great speed down Fitzgibbon Street. Catty Dowdall had her eyes squinted up and her tongue sticking out to one side of her mouth and was crouched down in a pose of grim determination. For a brief moment she wondered what the object was as it flew past her on the right-hand side of the cart. When she heard the loud scraping sound and saw Catty Browne tumble head over heels, she quickly realised it was one of their back wheels. The cart slewed sideways off the footpath, throwing Catty Dowdall into the gutter. It then proceeded down the hill, flipping over and over as splinters of wood flew in all directions. It came to a sudden halt at a post which held a sign that warned of an oncoming junction. There was a loud bang, and the body of the cart snapped in half. The 2 young girls rose slowly to their feet. They were standing 30 feet apart. Catty Browne had blood streaming from her kneecap, and a strip of material hung down from her torn skirt. Catty Dowdall was in a worse state. Both her knees and both elbows were bleeding, and there was a trickle of blood just above her eye. She stood staring at the debris that once was Flippin' Flyer. Her bottom lip quivered. She turned to look at Catty Browne. She too stood, hands by her sides, in shock. Tiny rivulets of tears running down her cheeks. Mark arrived back to Wise & Company at 3 p.m. Although he was wearing his work clothes, instead of going straight to his bench, he went to Sean McHugh's office. There he outlined what he intended to do and made 2 requests of Sean. One was for the rest of the afternoon off, the other was for the keys of the factory, so he could return after 6 o'clock when everyone had gone home. As he handed over the keys, Sean McHugh shook his head, astonished at the young man's enthusiasm. "I wish I had your energy, young Mark Browne. You'll have your own factory some day, I'm sure of it." Mark took the keys with a smile and replied, "Maybe you're right, Mr. McHugh. But when I do, I hope I'm lucky enough to get a foreman like Mr. Wise has here." He winked at the old man, dropped the keys into his pocket, and headed off for his afternoon's shopping. The click from the metallic switchbox reverberated throughout the factory. It took Mark more than an hour to clear away the corner of the factory where he would work on his project. Once the area was cleared, he then went to the huge design table and, removing the sheets of paper from his back pocket, clipped them under the bull clip of the reference board. His first task would be to draw templates of the designs he had drawn, to be copied 3 times. Wise & Company always had hardboard sheets in stock specifically for this purpose. Mark manoeuvred the first hardboard sheet onto the design table and, with a yardstick, protractor and pencil, began to lay down the first of the templates. Some time later, Mark heard the door bang closed in the distance, and Sean McHugh's voice cried out, "Mark, it's only me." "Down here, Mr. McHugh, at the design table."
Mark was having trouble making the templates from his designs. He had already discarded one complete sheet of hardboard. Sean's shiny red face came into the light.
How's it going?
Not great. I can't get these fucking templates right. Frustration was setting in. From his inside pocket, Sean took a metal spectacle case from which he unfolded a very old pair of glasses. He put them on, clipped the box shut and inserted it back in his pocket. He was looking at the designs as he began to remove his coat.
Right then, let's have a look at this.
Slowly Sean McHugh smiled.
Clever little bastard, aren't you?
He said with a hint of admiration in his voice. Mark laughed.
Mind you, these sweets won't last pissing time.
They're not supposed to, Mr. McHugh, Mark replied, and both men laughed. Sean snapped open his yardstick, ready to go to work.
Right, son. You make us a cup of tea, and I'll get working on these templates.
Sean took the pencil from his ear and watched Mark walk away towards the canteen. A couple of hours later, Sean McHugh was on his third cup of tea. He had already successfully drawn 4 sheets of templates, which Mark was now cutting on the bandsaw. It was already midnight. Sean was running the pencil along the yardstick when the problem dawned on him. He stopped abruptly. He took the designs from the bolt clip and walked over to the bandsaw, where Mark was working. Mark saw him coming and pressed the stop button on the saw. When the saw died into silence, Sean said,
"We have a problem, Mark."
"What?" Mark asked. Sean laid the designs down on the bandsaw plate. He pointed to one of the drawings of the finished sweets.
"These backs," he began.
"What about them?"
"There'll be 36 panels and 18 buttons in each back."
"That's right."
"And the seat cushions, there'll be 9 panels, 4 buttons in each cushion, is that right?"
Mark studied the designs. Then he looked up at Sean. "Yeah, that's right. It's all there in the design. What's the problem?" Sean looked at Mark over the rim of his glasses, then slowly he removed them.
"And who's going to do the sewing?"
Mark closed his eyes. Fuck. The sewing. Fuck. It was 1 a.m. and cold. Mark stood outside the door of 32 Gardner Row. The ground floor flat was in darkness, as it had been for the 10 minutes that he'd been standing there. At last he plucked up the courage. He rapped on the door. Nothing stirred inside the flat. He rapped again, this time harder. There was some movement from the far side of the door, and he heard the hushed tones of voices. Finally the door opened, and there stood Betty Collins, wrapped in a blanket. "Mark Browne, what the fuck do you want at this hour of the morning?" I have a problem, Betty." "Let me guess. The turnips on your trousers fell down. Well, we only handle complaints between 9 and 5. Now fuck off." She began to close the door. Mark quickly put his hand against it. "Betty, please, just listen." Betty listened to the whole story without interruption. When Mark had finished, she glanced over her shoulder and then back to him and said, "I have to get dressed and collect some things. You wait here. I'll just be a couple of minutes." True to her word, it was just a couple of minutes before Betty arrived out, dressed, wrapped in a duffel coat, with her hair now freshly brushed. She had collected her scissors and measuring tape. The two of them walked to Wise & Company in virtual silence. By 5:15 a.m, Agnes Browne was up on her way to the fruit wholesale markets, though her thoughts were with her eldest boy. Meanwhile, back in Wise & Company, Mark had completed the frames for the 6 single-seater chairs for the suites and was nearly finished the first of the 3-seater frames. After a short introduction to Sean McHugh, Betty had rolled up her sleeves and busied herself in the task of cutting out the patterns. "I'm finished," she announced just as Sean arrived with 2 mugs of tea, one for her and one for himself. "Mr. McHugh, I need to get all this stuff back up to the flat to the machine. I'll never be able to carry it."
"Oh, that's okay, love. We can load it into the van and I'll drive you up. Will it take long to run it up?"
"Nah, no more than an hour."
"I'll wait with you, so if that's all right."
"Yeah, sure, no problem, Mr. McHugh, but we better get going." They began to gather up the material and had the van loaded in a couple of minutes. Sean called back to Mark.
"Mark, we're taking the stuff up to the sewing machine. We should be back in just over an hour."
Mark did not look up. Not even the rhythm of his hammer swing was disturbed. He just called out, "Okay, Mr. McHugh." And with the beads of perspiration popping out even on his forearms, he worked on. By 7:15, the work was done. The 3 stood appraising the night's labour.
"You've done a fine job, Mark. A really fine job."
Sean was now a little refreshed, having had an hour's sleep in an armchair at Betty Collins' flat. Mark stood with his arms folded. Betty reached over and laid her hand on his forearm. "They're beautiful," she exclaimed. It was her hand touching his arm that excited Mark more than the praise she gave his work. "Right," said Mark.
It's time to get these two fellas down to have a look. Are you going straight up to the Gresham? Asked Sean. I'll have to go home first, clean up and change into my new outfit. Mark turned to Betty. Betty, thanks very much. I really couldn't have done it without you. Make up a bill, whatever it is, and I'll pay you. Betty gave a short laugh. Mark Browne, let me tell you two things. Firstly, there's no bill. It was nice to be doing something different. I really enjoyed it. And secondly, if you think I'm leaving here before finding out what those men think of your work, you've another thing coming to you. Go get them. I'll be here when you get back. Mark found Greg Smith and Frank Reel in the restaurant having breakfast. Mark addressed Greg. I don't know what time you've planned to leave Dublin today, Mr. Smith, but I hope you have time to come and look at something in the factory. What is it? Furniture, Mr. Smith. Greg Smith put his hand over his eyes, as if slightly in pain. Look, Mark, I never had a problem with the quality of Wise & Company's furniture. I think you're missing the point here. I really don't think there's anything you can show me that will change our mind. It was obvious that he wasn't budging. Mark's voice was very calm, although inside he was starting to panic. Look, Mr. Smith, Mr. Wise is a good and decent man, and he's been doing business with you for 30 years. And from what you say, he's never let you down. The least you owe us is 15 minutes. What about it? After a tense couple of moments, Greg succumbed. Okay. And he threw the serviette onto his plate. Of the 20 staff that were still employed at Wise & Company, 12 were young apprentices. The other 8 were made up of Sean McHugh, a designer, and 6 craftsmen. The youngest of those 8 was 35 years of age. The next youngest to him, 58, and the rest were all over 60. When they had arrived for work that morning, Sean McHugh had ushered them all into the canteen. When everyone had a mug of tea in his hand, Sean began to tell them what was happening at Wise & Company. He informed them about the rapid drop in business. He told them of Mr. Wise's declining health. He gave them the details of the previous day's meeting with Smith and Bloy, and finally he outlined Mark Browne's efforts to rescue the company. They listened in silence. When he had finished, Sean led the lot of them like a Japanese tour group to the 3 suites, which they examined closely. They sat on the chairs, they turned them upside down. One of the craftsmen even lay on the couch, deciding to judge it as most people judge their couch, by how comfortable it is to lie on and watch TV. Suddenly Betty Collins let out a cry from the office. Mr. McHugh, the taxi! They're here in a taxi! For some reason inexplicable to himself, Sean McHugh cried, They're here! Everybody hide! Even more inexplicable was the fact that everybody did. Bodies scurried in all directions. Sean ran into the office and closed the door, then suddenly realised that he was the boss. He buttoned his collar, coughed and marched out to meet the customer, whispering from the side of his mouth to Betty Collins to keep down. The first thing Mark noticed as he led the 2 men into the factory was how quiet it was. Nobody was working. The place looked like a ghost town. As he walked towards the corner where the 3 suites were, he looked around the factory and could feel pairs of eyes peering at him from the most unusual places. He scratched his head in wonderment, but carried on nonetheless. Here you are, Mark announced, and waved his hand across the 3 suites. Frank Reel smiled. Greg Smith said nothing. For a moment he didn't budge. Suddenly he moved into action. He was like a doctor examining a newborn baby. He turned the suites upside down, he laid them on their sides, he sat in them, and even stood in one of the armchairs. Mark went over to the suites and stood face to face with Greg. Well, what do you think? How much? He asked simply. Mark looked over Greg Smith's shoulder at Sean, who promptly held up 7 fingers. Mark took this to mean £70, but he wasn't a market dealer's son for nothing. £90 a suite, Mark said evenly. Sean put his hands up to his face. Nah, I wouldn't pay more than 80, Greg Smith answered. Mark extended his hand and simply said, Done. Greg Smith took Mark's hand, smiled and turned to Sean. Sean, I'll take as many of these as you can make. Suddenly the empty factory erupted with cheers and bodies rushed from every corner. Mark emitted a couple of short bursts of nervous laughter, which turned into hearty laughter as the old craftsmen gathered around him, patting him on the back. Then he glanced towards Sean's office and saw Betty Collins standing in the doorway. Her eyes were watery. She was tired, but her smile was nearly the width of the doorway. Mark returned the smile, then raised his fist in the air and exclaimed, Yes! The clinching of the Smith and Bly order was just the beginning of a few weeks of intense work for Mark.
All but a quarter of the factory had to be modified to suit the new formula of cut, assemble and cover. The other apprentices at Wise & Company were a great help, as most of them were learning about this new system in college. The older tradesmen, however, withdrew to the remaining quarter of the factory space, where they continued to turn out classic hardwood furniture. As well as modifying the factory to cope with the target he had set of 100 suites per month, Mark also needed to modify Wise & Company's business slightly. He discussed this at length with Mr. Wise and Sean McHugh, expressing his opinion that were the soft furnishing sides of the company to trade under a different name and as a different company to Wise & Company, then the hard furniture section could carry on, even in a modified way, without being tainted by the image of cheap furniture. Both men agreed, and Mr. Wise was particularly proud of Mark for making the effort to maintain the name of Wise & Company and to associate it only with quality furniture. He also insisted that since Mark had taken the ball, he should now run with it himself. And he told Mark he would leave it to him to organise and arrange the new company in his name. Benjamin Wise knew exactly what he was doing. He was grooming the young man so that he would be ready eventually to take over the entire business. Mark contacted Michael Fox Jr., the family solicitor. There were two contradictions here. First, although he continued to use the junior, Michael Fox, in his mid-60s, belied the title. Secondly, to refer to him as the Browne family solicitor was a bit of an exaggeration. The man had been used only once by the Brownes, and that was when Simon went to court for playing football in the street. But he was the only solicitor Mark knew. Mark wished to form a new company specifically for the soft furnishing side of Wise & Company's business. This presented little problem to Mr. Fox. The only slight hiccup that arose was when Mr. Fox asked Mark what he wished the company to be called. After a few moments' thought, Mark said Senga Soft Furnishings Limited, and smiled contentedly to himself. Later, Mr. Wise was the only one to spot that the name was Agnes backwards, which, Mark said, was no reflection on his mother's personality. Agnes's most pressing concern was young Simon. Following her decision on Frankie, Simon saw the opportunity for him too to depart school and get a job. This didn't go down well with Agnes at all. Frankie, she explained to Simon, was being thrown out of school, where the teacher had described Simon as a slow but lovable pupil. Nevertheless, Simon stuck to his guns, and had now fixed himself up with an appointment for an interview for a job as a porter in St. Patrick's Hospital. Having just broken the news to Agnes, Simon sat awaiting her pronouncement on it. "So you've got yourself an interview?" "Yeah, Mummy." "Do you realise what an interview means?" Simon looked at his mother blankly, not really understanding the question. "The man will ask you questions." Simon's brow rose, his mouth hung open, and he slowly nodded his head. "And you will have to answer them. Speak to him." "So?" Agnes leaned over and placed her hand on Simon's hand. "You have a stutter, love." Agnes said this as if it were going to be a surprise to Simon. So? Agnes was trying to be as gentle as she could. "Do you not feel a stutter might affect your chances of getting the job?" No. Why should it?" Simon asked, quite genuinely not seeing a problem. Agnes exhaled. "Jesus, son. If someone needs a bedpan and calls you, by the time you say, what do you want, they'll have shit in the bed." Mummy, I'm a porter, not a bleeding nurse." Agnes had to acknowledge the boy's resolve. "All right. Of course I wish you well. I'm just afraid of you being disappointed, that's all. If you get the job, you can take it." The boy smiled and hugged his mother. Don't worry, ma'am. I'll get the job," Simon declared confidently. 10 days later, Simon was standing in the toilet just off the personnel office of St. Patrick's Hospital. Outside in the waiting room, there were 20 other hopefuls for the porter's job. Simon looked at himself in the mirror. With a hand each side of the sink, he leaned close to his reflection and inhaled deeply. "How now, brown cow," he said to his reflection. Once again he inhaled deeply. "Around the rugged rock to fuck it." Behind him in a cubicle the toilet flushed.
The door opened and out strode a young man, maybe a year or two older than Simon. The fellow walked straight to the exit door, opened it, and then turned to Simon, paused for a moment and said, "Fuck me, I can see I'm up against it." He laughed as he exited. Simon's heart sank. He returned to the waiting room and sat down. Each time he caught the eye of the young man, Simon would blush a little. He fixed his gaze on the door of the personnel manager's office and waited. The door opened and yet another young applicant left the room. This one looked a little dejected. Simon chastised himself for feeling glad at the applicant's expression. The secretary entered the office and closed the door. She had brought out a new batch of applications. Minutes later, she opened the door again and called, "Mr. Simon Browne, please." Simon had been quite calm up to that, bordering on confident. He couldn't explain what happened the minute he heard that young lady call his name. His legs turned to jelly, his stomach went queasy, and he felt light-headed. He suddenly found himself closing the office door from the inside without remembering how he got up and walked to the door at all. The room was sparsely decorated. There were 4 filing cabinets, dark green in colour, and beside them was a table stacked up with even more files. There was a huge map on one wall which took in counties Dublin, Kildare, Wicklow, Louth and Meath. The title on the map read Eastern Health Board Area. In the centre of the room was a well-worn dark brown wooden desk, behind which sat a rather gaunt-looking man, wearing thick black rimmed glasses. He had on a navy suit, blue shirt and tie, and had a head that refused to believe it was bald, with a thick growth of hair on each side and what looked like 20 banjo strings across the top. Without speaking, the man indicated the chair on the opposite side of the desk, on which Simon promptly sat down. Simon remained quiet for a couple of moments while the man read the application form he held in his hands. He recognised his own writing on the back page. The bald man gently placed the application form on the desk in front of him, looked up at Simon and began, So you are Simon Browne?" For a moment Simon was stunned. He slowly nodded his head in assent. The man went on, "So, why do you want to leave school, Simon?" For the first time Simon spoke. "I want to work, and anyway, my teacher says I'm a slow pupil." Simon started work as the new trainee porter in St. Patrick's Hospital the following Monday. Frankie Browne sat on the small 2-foot wall that surrounded St. Giles' Church. Beside him, down behind the wall, 3 other skinheads were playing poker. Although a keen poker player himself, Frankie didn't want to join the boys in their game today. His mind was elsewhere. He had just 10 days of his mother's deadline left and still had nowhere to go. He'd no intention of getting a job. Jobs were for mugs. He was no mug. He was too smart to be a mug. He thought about going to London. He'd heard London was a great town for scams. Bunty Flynn said his brother was in London for 3 years and was signing on the dole at 6 different offices, making nearly £200 a week. That's the kind of money Frankie was interested in. Real money. He took a last drag on the cigarette and flicked the butt towards the curb. Just then, from around the side of the church, another skinhead, Copper Cullen, came running. He was breathless by the time he reached the group. Frankie stood up. "What's up, Copper?" The lads have a queer cornered up Peck's Lane. Come on." The card game was abandoned, and the 5 of them took off around the side of the church. Peck's Lane was just a minute's run from where they had been. As they came to the entrance to the lane, they could see 6 of their skinhead friends milling around a slumped figure. Because the figure was now on the ground, the gang resigned themselves to just booting the young man. Frankie was the last of the 5 to join the attacking gang. As he arrived into the group, he saw a gap in their legs and rammed his boot through the space straight into the back of the figure. This elicited a sharp yell from the young man and a whoop of joy from Frankie. Some of the others stood back to let Frankie have a good go. As he stood over the body, he could see clearly that the left arm was already broken, with the wrist bent backwards. The head was matted with blood, and what had probably been fairly decent clothes were now in tatters. He picked the back of the victim's neck for his next target. He drew his boot back, and as he did so, the body whimpered. For a moment Frankie hesitated. There was something about the whimper. It was babyish, and he recognised it. He had heard it before, years ago. He had heard it just after his father had died, and he and the other Brown boys still shared one bed. He leaned down, took the shoulder of the body and turned it towards him to see the battered face of a barely conscious Rory Browne. Before he passed out, Rory said simply, "Frankie?" "So what do you think?" Mark asked, unsure that he had done the right thing. The two older men didn't reply. They continued to walk around the dusty shop, glancing at the ceiling, stomping their feet on the floor. Mark looked at Betty. She was linking his arm. She gave him a little squeeze and smiled. "The rent is only £80 a month, and we can do most of the fitting ourselves." Still there was no reply from either Sean McHugh or Benjamin Wise. Sean had both hands thrust into his pockets, and Mr. Wise had a hand up each opposite sleeve and looked as if he was wearing a muff. Eventually Mr. Wise spoke. £80 a month, huh? Yeah, £80 a month, Mr. Wise. Wise turned to Sean. "That's not bad, Sean, is it?" "Not bad at all, Mr. Wise, not bad at all." Mark moved from Betty's sides towards the two men, and as he did so he said, "It'll give us our own retail outlet, just for the class furniture, the hardwood stuff." Mr. Wise removed his hands from his sleeves and extended his arms sideways, pushing his palms in the air as if he were making an offering. "Well, young Mark Browne, now, looks like we've got ourselves a shop." Mark smiled broadly and now launched into his plans for the shop, taking Mr. Wise by the arm and showing him each of his ideas for the layout, inch by inch. Mark was in full flight when a rapping at the front door stopped his gallop. All three men turned to see young Tom Lewis, an apprentice from the soft furnishing side of the business, standing breathless at the front door, pointing to the lock and mouthing the words, "Open the door." It was Betty who opened it. Tom pushed straight past her to Mark's side. "Mark, your mammy's been on the phone. You've got to go down to St. Patrick's Hospital. Your brother had an accident." Mark paled. "Which brother? Did she say which brother?" "Rory. She said it was Rory." By the time Mark arrived at the hospital, Rory had been shifted from casualty to intensive care. Confused, Mark walked the corridors as quickly as he could, trying to find intensive care, and luckily he bumped into Simon. Simon was pushing a trolley, wearing the green housecoat of a hospital porter. "Simon, what's happening?" Jesus, Mark, he's really bad." Mark was anguished. "Oh no, where's intensive care?" Come on, I'll show you." Just a couple of minutes later, and Mark was standing by the bedside of his younger brother Rory, along with his mother, Dermo, Cathy, Simon, and little Trevor. Rory looked dreadful. Both his eyes were puffed up and were black and closed. Agnes told Mark the full extent of the damage. "His nose is broken, and his left arm. He has 3 fractured ribs." She sobbed heavily between sentences. "He has stitches under his left eye and over his right eye, as well as 14 stitches in his back. They could have killed him." Mark took her in his arms and held her tightly. He spoke gently into her ear. "Mummy, he's okay now. He's safe. You're just upsetting the kids." "I know. I'm sorry, love. I just can't believe it." "Shh. It's okay, Mum. I'm here now. Look, you take Trevor home and start dinner, and we'll be along shortly after you. Go on. He's okay now. He's fine." Agnes didn't reply. She held her handkerchief to her eyes and nodded her head. She went to Rory's bedside and gave him a gentle kiss on the cheek, and through swollen lips, Rory muttered, "Thanks, Mummy." "I'm going home to get the tea for the kids. I'll be back later, love." "Okay, Ma." Agnes took Trevor and left the hospital. Mark sat on the edge of Rory's bed and leaned down closer to him. Rory looked up to Mark's face. Mark smiled and winked. Rory felt safe. He blinked, and as he did, 2 huge tears fell from his eyes. "So, was it skinheads?" Mark asked. Rory simply nodded. "How many of them?" 8 or 10, Rory mumbled. "The bastards. In packs like wolves." Mark was struggling to control his anger. He placed his hand gently on Rory's hand and held it firmly, but not too tightly. "Did you recognise them, Rory?" Rory looked into Mark's eyes a little longer than he should have, and then shook his head and mumbled, "No." Mark slowly nodded his head and then turned to Dermot. "Dermo, you bring Cathy with you and head for home. Tell Mammy I'll be along in a few minutes. I just want to talk to Rory on my own, okay?" Dermot didn't want to go, but acceded to his brother's wishes. "Well, all right, but I know what you two are going to talk about, Mark, and if you're going after them, I want in on it. He's my brother as well, you know, Dermot said as he picked up Kathy's coat. Mark smiled and put his arm around Dermot's neck. He pulled him close in a mock strangulation. OK, tough guy, don't you worry, you'll be there. I mean it, Dermot insisted. I know you do. So do I, Dermot. I promise. Now go on, off with you. Get Kathy out of here. When the two children had disappeared out of the ward, Mark turned his attention to Rory. You recognised him, didn't you, Rory? Rory began to sob loudly, his body quivering as he gasped for breath. Mark leaned very close to him, took both his shoulders in his hands and spoke firmly but gently, all the time looking into Rory's eyes. Who was it? Mark said it in a way that demanded an answer. Rory's lips began to quiver, and the answer trickled out. It was Frankie. Mark's grip tightened automatically, and he actually hurt Rory, who gave a little groan. Mark's face, which had been pale, was now blue. He stood up quickly. I'll see you later, Rory. Mark spun on his heel and left St. Patrick's Hospital, a dangerously angry young man. Mark didn't so much as enter the flat as explode into it. He looked fit to kill. Kathy, Trevor and Simon were sitting on the sofa watching television, and all three jumped simultaneously and sat gaping at the sight of this raving lunatic that resembled their brother. Mark moved swiftly to the kitchen area. Dermot had the frying pan on the cooker and was putting sausages onto it. Where's Frankie, Dermot? Frankie? He's not here. There was a tremor in Dermot's voice. Mark went to the bedroom. The first thing that caught his eye was the second drawer from the top in the chest of drawers, which was pulled out and empty. Mark yanked open the door of the wardrobe, and it too was empty, everything gone, including Mark's new businessman's outfit. The bastard. Mark returned to the kitchen. Dermot stood aghast with a half-pound of Hafner's sausages hanging in his left hand like a giant pearl necklace. The other three children, equally shocked and not a little frightened, peered in from the TV room. Where's Mummy? Mark asked Dermot. She's in our room, our bedroom. Mark spun and went to his mother's bedroom door. He rapped lightly but quickly and opened the door. Agnes was sitting on the bed. Her shoulders were slumped, and she slowly turned her head around to Mark. She'd been crying. Mark stood in the doorway. Are you all right, Mummy? Agnes didn't answer. Instead, she lifted up her left hand. She was holding a suede boot. Slowly, she turned the boot upside down. It was empty. At that moment, the B&I ferry Hibernia was just passing the Kish lighthouse, the last lighthouse ship on the Irish coast. The ferry was heading for England. So was Frankie Browne. Over the next few months, there was plenty to lift Agnes's mind from thoughts of her second eldest son overseas. On top of trying to cope with decimalisation, which was introduced that year, Agnes was now trying to handle the upheaval of the move to her new home. She'd been out a couple of times to the new house in Finglas. The journey took ages and the house seemed miles away. The bus took her past Glasnevin Cemetery, even a dairy, through the tiny village of Finglas, where the double-decker number 40 bus had great difficulty in negotiating the narrow bridge that crossed the Funglas River from Finglas East to Finglas West, where her new home was to be. Thankfully, once the bus reached its terminus on Barry Road, Agnes had just a 1-minute walk to her new house on Wolftown Grove. Agnes still hated the thought of leaving Dublin city centre. She'd been born, christened and reared, confirmed, wooed, kissed and wed within a 1-mile radius of James Larkin Court. And although all her furniture and personal things were carefully packed and ready for the move, Agnes knew that the memories encapsulated in that 1-mile circle could not be taken out to the country. Her attitude to the move had softened just a little when in January 2 bombs had exploded in Dublin city centre, a spin-off of the Northern Troubles. 2 people were killed in the bombings. Agnes's mother-hen instinct told her that the coop was now a little bit too close to danger and that her chicks would be safer 8 miles away in Finglas. The first bus from Finglas into Dublin left the terminus at 6:05, much too late for Agnes or Carmel Dowdall to carry out their market business. Luckily, next door to Agnes in number 45 lived the Bradys, Carol and her husband Ned. They had 7 children, and needless to say, quickly became referred to as the Brady Bunch, although they couldn't have been more unlike the Brady Bunch had they tried. God loved them. Ned was a short, fat man with a bloated face and a massive head of mousy brown hair. He had tiny little pin-sized eyes beneath hugely puffy eyebrows, which gave him the appearance of Barney Rubble after 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali. His wife Carol, as Agnes had remarked once to Carmel Dowdall, had a face that looked like a cow licking piss off a nettle.
And the children, God loved them, looked like a collection a 3-year-old child would draw in a picture. Still, they were good-hearted people who had previously lived in Sheriff Street, and the bonus both for Agnes and Carmel was that Ned was a baker. Ned worked in St. Joseph's Bakery, just off North Frederick Street. His starting time was 4:30 a.m, and he had a car. So the two girls would join Ned every morning on his city-bound trip, both women sitting in the back of the Volkswagen Beetle where they could still see the road ahead clearly, as little Ned's head came just above the dashboard. Mark continued to cycle to work, downhill all the way to the city and uphill on the return journey, although this never seemed to bother him. Rory, now recovered from his beating, rode safely and soundly in and out of the city centre on the number 40 bus. Dermot struck up a friendship with the eldest Brady son, Patrick, whose nickname was Buster. Physically, the two had little in common. Dermot had now become more handsome by the day and had an athletic physique, and Buster probably 2 stone overweight and looking like he was going to explode any moment. However, Buster was a very happy young fella and laughed at every one of Dermot's jokes. Over the next year, they would grow to be best friends, Dermot enjoying the role of becoming Buster's protector and Buster idolising the very ground that Dermot walked upon. Cathy Browne and Cathy Dowdall, heading towards their 16th birthday, were blossoming into beautiful young girls. Boys from the adjoining roads of Casement, Barry and Mellows began hanging around Wolftown Grove. Some boys even ventured up to Wolftown Grove from as far as Ballygall Parade and McKelvey Avenue, both in East Finglas. This could be a treacherous trip, because in Finglas, as in the city centre, the tribal system soon took over and East did not see eye to eye with West. Still, these boys believed it was worth it, in the hope of getting off with 2 of the beauties of Finglas West. For their part, the girls enjoyed the attention, and although Cathy Browne was a little bit shy, Cathy Dowdall made up for that with her ebullience and openness. In fact, one could describe her as a flirt. The girls would kiss selected boys, Cathy Dowdall more enthusiastically than Cathy Browne. The main difference between the two girls was that Cathy Dowdall was looking for a good time, whereas Cathy Browne was looking for someone to love. This probably explained the shock on Cathy Browne's face one evening as she sat on the corner of her bed, digesting what Cathy Dowdall had just announced. "A feel? You're going to give him a feel?" "Yeah, a feel." "Why?" "'Cause I want to." "Well, what if you get pregnant?" "Don't be stupid, you can't get pregnant from a feel. Can you?" "I don't know." A short silence followed. Cathy Dowdall did not meet with Cathy Browne's eyes. "Anyway, I already let him feel me diddies." Cathy Browne said nothing, just threw her head back and roared with laughter. "What are you laughing at?" "I did." Cathy Browne stopped laughing and looked at her friend. "Cathy, you don't have any diddies." "Well, me nipples then. I let him feel me nipples. It was lovely, Cathy." Cathy Browne reddened a little, not really wanting to know the details of the other Cathy's nipple escapade. Instead, she moved the conversation along. "So when is this feel going to happen?" "Tonight, I suppose." "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." Cathy Browne ended her side of the conversation with a tremor in her voice. David Malloy was 15.5 years old. He would be 16 in 5 months' time. He'd went to secondary school in the newly built Patrician College at Dunsink Road in Finglas. David had always felt a little closer to God than to his friends, and after only his first year in college, he announced secretly to Brother Francis, his religious knowledge teacher, that he felt he might have a vocation. Brother Francis had been very calm and understanding with the young boy. Vocations from the pupils of patrician colleges throughout Ireland were not a rare thing, but neither were false vocations or perceived vocations. Brother Francis told David that he was very young to make such a bold decision, and that he should dwell upon the thought and pray to God for guidance. He should also, in the meantime, live the life of a normal young boy as much as possible, and as Brother Francis put it, put your vocation to the test. This David Malloy had faithfully done for the last year. Little was he to know that this night, the night of his second date with a pretty girl from Wolftown Grove named Cathy Dowdall, his vocation was about to undergo its greatest test yet. The two of them sat in the balcony seats of the Casino Cinema in Finglas Village. There was a double bill. The first movie, Imitation of Life, had brought sniffles from every corner of the theatre. Now midway through the second film, Madame X, the audience cried openly as Lana Turner opened the bedroom door to bid her child a silent farewell. David sat sniffling. Cathy, her arm linked into his left arm and her head resting on his shoulder, was not sniffling. Instead, she was beginning to panic.
Halfway through the second film and he hasn't even fucking kissed me yet, she thought to herself. She looked up into his face. A thin rivulet was running down his cheek and his eyes were locked on the silver screen. Kathy realised that if she were going to make any progress this night with her feel, she would have to get the ball rolling herself. "I'll be back in a minute. I have to go to the toilet," she whispered into David's ear. He smiled at her with tear-filled eyes and nodded his head. Half crouching, she made her way past the 8 people between her seat and the end of the row, and headed for the ladies. There were 2 other girls there, one standing at the sink smoking, the other busy at the mirror applying the war paint. Kathy went into one of the cubicles and locked the door. Quickly she removed her knickers, white cotton airtex, and rolling them into a tight ball she held them in her fist. She flushed a chain in the toilet and exited from the cubicle in time to leave the ladies with the other 2 girls. When she was back seated beside David, she snuggled into him once again. The movie still commanded his full attention. Lana Turner was now roaming the snowy streets, mistaking every young boy for her own lost child. It was all very moving. Kathy nudged David, and grudgingly he took his eyes from the screen and looked at her. "Look what I have," Kathy said in a hushed voice, as she held out her hand containing the knickers. She opened her fist, and the knickers seemed to bloom like a posy on a Sunday morning. David looked at them, puzzled for a moment. "I took me knickers off for you." Kathy smiled. David smiled too. He took the knickers from her hand and began to mop his tears. As Kathy stared at him incredulously, he then blew his nose. "How thoughtful of you, Kathy," he said, half sobbing. Kathy thumped him in the gut and snatched the knickers back. "You filthy bastard, filling me knickers with snots. What did I tell me, Ma?" "I took them off so you could do it," she explained in a hushed voice, although it brought a couple of shh from the surrounding audience. "Do what?" David whispered. "Feel it." "Feel what?" "So you could feel me cherry." For a moment David said nothing. But I don't want to feel your cherry," he said finally. "I do," a voice from behind him announced. "Fuck off, you," Kathy snapped back to the voice in the dark. She sat in silence for a moment. David returned his attention to Lana Turner. Kathy's thoughts drifted away. She had read somewhere that some men are slow to respond to sexual advances by women, and in these cases a little bit of coaxing would be required. Fearing the film would end soon and her chance would be gone, Kathy got straight down to the coaxing. She leaned across David's lap and with both hands undid the zip of his charcoal grey patrician college trousers. When she looked up into David's face, she had on a leering smile. David, on the other hand, had his eyes wide open in shock. She began to rummage around the snow-white jockey Y-fronts until she found a little opening and carefully slipped her hand in. She again looked up at David's face. He now had his eyes tightly closed and his lips were barely moving. At last her hand found its target. Pulling the flap of the Y-fronts to one side, she extracted his now erect pecker. "Oh, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee," David began to pray aloud. Suddenly there were shushes all around. A girl's voice yelled, "Shut the fuck up!" By now David had a tremor in his voice and his knuckles were going white on the arm of the seat. Kathy was stunned. Then she noticed the usherette arriving down the steps with the flashing torch. The beam was going in all directions. Quickly, Kathy sat back into her seat as the torch began to move along the row. It first passed, then quickly returned to settle on David's fly. Kathy took a sideways glance at the point of attention of the light. David Malloy looked a sight. His eyes tightly closed, perspiration running from his brow and gripping the arms of the seat like he was about to take off. His little penis was protruding from the grey trousers, and when the light settled upon it, it looked like a little cabaret singer. One expected it to break into My Delilah any moment. Kathy Browne was in tears the next day as Kathy Dowdall told her how David Malloy was taken from the cinema by the scruff of the neck up the aisle with his pecker hanging out. Undeterred over the next few years, Kathy Dowdall went on to bigger and better things. David Malloy remained traumatised for some time, yet the night did one good thing for him. It confirmed his vocation. London, 1975. 5 years later. Manny Wise couldn't believe his luck. He had found him. He'd found him quite by accident in a kebab shop right across the road from the entrance to King's Cross station a year ago. He knew the minute he saw the young man that he was different. Although a bit dirty, obviously from some months on the street, he was handsome and had a good physique. This boy, Manny thought, looks after himself. He watched the young man take his place in the line and noted how his eyes drifted from customer to customer. The young man eventually chose his prey. It wasn't what he did that impressed Manny, but the way he did it. What ends the career of most thieves is that they are consumed by their own greed. This lad was not greedy. The target he chose was a young lady in a leather miniskirt and wool jacket. She was accompanied by a handsome, tall, middle-aged man. They had had a few drinks and seemed happy in each other's company. The young homeless man's removal of the girl's purse from her handbag was pure poetry in motion, fast, smooth and professional. But it was what happened next that most impressed Manny. He watched the young man closely. The man very quickly opened the purse, removed some notes, but not all of them. He closed the purse and stuffed the notes into his pocket. Then he waited. The happy couple paid for their takeaway meal, and as they moved towards the door, the young man called after them in a Dublin accent. "Excuse me, missus." The girl turned on her heel. "Yes?" "You dropped this." The young man proffered the purse. The girl slapped the side of her handbag and opened it as if not believing it was her purse. She then gave him a broad smile. "Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you." "Nice one, mate. Appreciate that," the girl's escort added, and winked. The young man smiled shyly and said, "Don't mention it," and returned to his place in the line. Manny was very impressed. He rose from his seat and went to the counter, skipping the queue. He asked the young lady for another coffee. As the girl was making the coffee for him, he drifted down the line, leaned over to the young man and spoke very softly. "I saw that, mate. Work of art. Different class." Manny then returned to the top of the line, collected his coffee and sat back down in his cubicle. As the line moved up, the young man stared at Manny. When he came abreast of where Manny was seated, Manny invited him over. "Get your stuff and sit down here, mate. You and me should have a little talk." "Are you fuzz?" the young man asked. This brought a howl of laughter from Manny. "If I were fuzz, mate, I'd have had the bracelets on you and you'd be in the back of the fucking squad car 10 minutes ago. Get your stuff and sit down here." They sat talking and drinking coffee for 2 hours. The young man gave his name as Ben Daly. Although Manny suspected that this was not his real name, Manny didn't care. He liked him. A lot. "You're not greedy, son. I like that." "I do okay." "Well, how would you like to do a lot better than okay?" "Well, what would I have to do?" "A little bit of this, a little bit of that." "For you?" "Yeah, for me, my son. What you do now is Mickey Mouse stuff. I'll put you in the big league. You'll be my right-hand man." "So that's what you want me to do for you? What can you do for me?" "Get you out of those shitty clothes for a start, sonny boy. Take you down to Savile Row, get you a bit of decent gear. My right-hand man's got to look a bit spiv, and of course, put a few bob in your pocket. Life can be flesh when you've got a bit of cash, know what I mean?" Ben Daly's cold blue eyes never left those of Manny Wise. Manny figured he'd done enough. He'd made his pitch. He'd made the man a decent offer. He began to stir his coffee and waited for his answer. After a few moments, Ben Daly's face cracked into a smile. "Mr. Wise, looks like you've got yourself a right-hand man." Ben extended his hand, and the two shook hands warmly. Over the next few weeks, Ben Daly, or whatever his name was, began working for Manny. He was quick to learn, intelligent, and at times very, very funny. Manny would often muse that in essence Ben was a typical Dubliner. Unlike the other kids that Manny had recruited in the past, Ben did not jump straight onto the drugs trail. In fact, it took some months before Manny convinced the young man to try a snort of cocaine. But once he'd got into it, Ben loved it. And Manny and Ben would have a couple of drinks, a snort and a good laugh most weekends. As the famous tobacco manufacturer John Pierre once said, "If you're hooked, you're hooked." Over the following months, Manny managed the young man very carefully. He would pose little tests for the lad, giving Ben opportunities here and there to skim a little cash for himself, or to stash some coke for himself. But Ben never did, seeming to be content to walk in Manny's shadow and nibble on the crumbs of the good life. Manny was ecstatic. He had at last found his right-hand man. Little by little, Manny began to trust the young man further and further, until eventually he trusted Ben to go and meet the Amsterdam connection himself. Ben lived in a small bedsit over a TV rental shop in Harlesden, a predominantly black area, but he never seemed to have any trouble, and he built up a nice little cocaine and heroin outlet for himself.
Many wives began to relax and depended on Ben more and more as time went on. For his part, Ben Daly never let many wives down. They were, it seemed, of like mind and like kind. Dublin, 1975. "Happy birthday, dear Mark," the crowd sang. There followed a communal cheer. Mark was embarrassed and looked every inch of it. He stole a sideways glance at Agnes. Tears welled in her eyes, but she looked very proud. "Blow out the candles, Mark," Betty shrieked. Mark was holding Betty's hand as he leaned forward towards the cake, which was shaped like a big 21, and with one large puff extinguished all the candles. This again was met with a huge cheer, and to Agnes's delight, the DJ blasted out Cliff Richard singing "Congratulations." Agnes was pleased she had decided to have Mark's 21st birthday party at home. The back garden was certainly big enough for the marquee, which Mark had paid £80 to rent. What had formerly been the coal shed was now the bar. It was manned by Dermot and Buster Brady. They'd managed to procure a cooler and some kegs of Guinness from, well, God knows where. Rory had brought a new friend to the party, Dean O'Doyle. Like Rory, he was a qualified hairstylist, and like Rory, he was homosexual. Agnes was unaware of Rory's homosexuality and still held out hopes that he would meet a nice girl someday and settle down. Indeed, Rory had tried to tell her on one occasion. It was one of Rory's midweek days off. Agnes had taken the day off as well, and they sat in the kitchen having a cup of tea. Rory looked up into his mother's face. "Mammy." "Yes, love, what is it?" "I want you to know something." Agnes smiled at her son. "Yes, love, what do you want me to know?" Rory hesitated before breaking what he knew would be earth-shattering news to Agnes. I'm gay, Mammy." Agnes held on to her smile and said casually, "That's nice, I'm happy too." And she stood up and began to clean the kitchen. Apart from Frankie, who Agnes knew wouldn't be there, both Cathy and Simon were also missing from the party, albeit temporarily. Simon was on late shift at the hospital where he was now a senior porter and would arrive back to the house at about 10 p.m. Cathy had slipped out of the party momentarily to go 2 doors up to Cathy Dowdall's house, where Cathy was putting her young baby to sleep. Nobody in Wolftongue Grove, nor indeed Finglas, was surprised when Cathy Dowdall became pregnant just a year ago. Cathy Browne had lost count of the amount of false alarms her friend had had before eventually falling prey to the joys of motherhood. Her baby, Emmett, now 3 months old, was a beautiful child, and both the Cathys doted on him. Baby Emmett was a bit restless, and Cathy Dowdall said she would hang on a little longer before returning to the party. Cathy Browne hurried back as she was expecting her own special guest. While Cathy Dowdall's search for a good time resulted in the birth of a beautiful baby, Cathy Browne's search for love had come to fruition too, she believed. About 2 months ago, she had met Mick O'Leary. It was love at first sight for both of them. They had seen each other virtually every day since their first meeting, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night, depending on how Mick's shift was working. Mick came from Bishopstown, County Cork, and was in Dublin only because his job had taken him there. This coming weekend, Cathy was to make the trip to Cork to meet Mick's parents, but tonight it was Mick's turn to be introduced to the Browne clan. As Cathy was rushing back to number 43 on the party, she saw the shadowy figure of a man walking towards her halfway up the street. His swagger made Cathy think it might be Mick, and this was confirmed when he called her name. His step got a little quicker, and when they eventually met at the gate of the Browne household, they hugged each other and kissed passionately. "Sounds like a hell of a party," Mick said, nodding towards the house. "Yes, it is. You're about to meet the Brownes at their best, or worst." "Well, you've talked so much about them, Cathy, I feel I know them all already. So come on, let's go and meet the Browne brood." In the hallway, Mick looked up the stairs and saw a young boy sitting on the top step. The boy had what appeared to be a sketch pad on his knees, and his hands were working furiously. "Who's that?" Mick asked. "That's my youngest brother, Trevor. He just keeps drawing all the time. I think he's a bit slow." Cathy pulled Mick towards the back door, where the main action was taking place. They went down the 2 steps to the backyard, and Cathy walked over to the bar where Buster and Dermot were now pissed drunk and trying to sing "Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep" in harmony. Dermo, where's Mammy?" Cathy called over the din. Dermot turned to Buster and said, "Buster, is my face red?" "Red? No, Dermo, your face isn't red." "Then she mustn't be up me arse." The two exploded into laughter, wrapping their arms around each other as only drunk men can. "Dermo, I'm serious. Where's Mammy?" Cathy was now a little annoyed. Dermot copped on. Sorry, Cathy, I was only messing. She's inside somewhere. You go in and get her, and I'll give your man a drink. Cathy squeezed Mick's hand. Do you mind, Mick? Not at all. You go on and get your mother, girl. I'll have a chat with the barman. Cathy vanished into the marquee, and Mick stepped up to the bar. What'll it be, Sham? Dermot asked him. Oh, a pint of Guinness, I suppose, seeing as how you have it there. We have Guinness, we have Smithwick's, we have Harp, we have any draught you want. Isn't that right, Buster? That's right, Dermot. Browne and Brady, purveyors of fine draught beers. Dermot chuckled as he began to pull the point. With 2/3 of the glass full, he placed the point on the drip tray to allow it to settle. Dermot now turned his full attention to Mick. So, Sham, you're the boyfriend we've all been hearing about. Mick smiled. Well, be Jesus, I hope so. Otherwise I've wasted a lot of money over the last couple of weeks entertaining somebody else's girl. Dermot laughed heartily, liking the man immediately. I can tell by your accent that you're not from Dublin. Where are you from? Cork, Mick said simply, and nodded towards the point, which was now ready for topping up. Dermot took the point up and pushed the pump handle forward. He placed it in front of the foreigner from Cork and continued with the questions. So, tell us, what's your name then, Sham? Mick picked up the point, studied it as a first point should be studied, and then answered, Well, my name is Michael, but the boys in the station call me Mick. And then he began to take a long mouthful from the cool point. Well then, Mick it is. Now, listen, Mick. If ever you need a bit of cheap gear... Station? What fucking station? Mick withdrew the glass from his mouth and carefully and slowly licked the white creamy moustache left on his top lip. He then smacked his lips and turned his face to Dermot. Fingers Garda station. I'm a Garda there. Dermot could have done with some help from Buster as he stumbled backwards, but Buster was doing his best to stand up straight while still throwing up behind the 2 stolen Guinness kegs. Mick O'Leary smiled and took his point to the doorway of the marquee. Well, Mammy, what do you think? He looks all right. But Jesus Christ, a guard! I don't know, Cathy. For Christ's sake, Mammy, it's a job, not a disease. Agnes turned towards her daughter and looked into her face. It was a face she recognised well. She'd seen it in a mirror 24 years before. She took both of Cathy's hands in hers. Tell me, sweetheart, what do you think? For a moment, Cathy dropped her eyes. Then, lifting her head, she returned her mother's glance. I know it's only a couple of months, Mammy, but I think I love him. Agnes squeezed Cathy's hand a little tighter. And when he kisses you, love, do you feel a little feather running up and down your spine? Yes, I do, Cathy answered excitedly, not realising that anyone else could have felt this. Then you've found the one. And don't you ever let him out of your sight. Agnes said this with a big smile and went to let go of Cathy's hands, but Cathy held on a little longer. Is that what you felt, Mammy? With Daddy, the feather running up and down your spine? Agnes's smile was a sad smile. No, love. With your father it was an ice cube. I didn't get the feather till I met Pierre. Now come on, let's go and get our men. Cathy gave her mother a huge hug, and the 2 girls went on to join their partners. Rory danced crazily with his friend Dino. The 2 lads obviously didn't have any luck with the girls that were there, Agnes thought. Cathy sat on the lap of her Garda boyfriend, and they talked and looked at each other as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Mark celebrated the official age of becoming a man, though Agnes knew that this boy had been a man since he was 14. Dermot and Buster Brady, for some reason, were upstairs putting things into the attic, and Trevor was sound asleep in his bed. Suddenly the music stopped, and Agnes heard the DJ blow into a microphone and announce, Ladies and gentlemen, a bit of quiet, please. We'll have a few words from the man of the moment, Mr. Mark Browne. The announcement was greeted with a huge cheer, intermingled with a bit of friendly name-calling from Mark's football teammates. As Mark took the microphone, Agnes rose from the back step and walked to the doorway of the marquee to hear his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark began, only to be met with jeers and calls of, Go on out with that. Mark laughed, but went on. Friends and family, I can't thank yous all enough for the many presents I've received. It's great to see so many friends here, both from town and from Finglas, our new home. I asked the DJ to let me speak for 2 reasons, and neither of them was to make a speech. The first reason was to say thank you, not the one I just said, but a special thank you to a very special person, All heads turned to the doorway where Agnes Browne stood. Betty went behind the DJ stand and returned with a huge bouquet of roses. Mark took the bouquet from Betty, cradled it in his right arm, and continued his speech. "I have here in me arm a bouquet of roses. There's 21 yellow roses and 3 red ones. I want to explain what they're for. The 21 yellow roses, Mammy, are to remind you of where you were and what you were doing this night 21 years ago. I hope I was worth it." Agnes stood in the doorway and just slowly mouthed the word, "Yes." "The first red rose, Ma, is to say thanks for all you gave up to try and make things better for us." There was now total silence in the marquee. "The second red rose, Ma, is from all your sons and your daughter to remind you how much we love you. And the third red rose, Ma, is because I wanted an extra one in the bunch. Because I want you to know that if I could round up all the roses in the world and gather them here into this tent tonight, you'd still deserve one more." Agnes walked to her son and gave him a hug. She took the flowers and held them close to her like a newborn baby. She embraced Betty and their tears mingled. And suddenly she was surrounded by neighbours and friends and trying to feign indifference. Mark once again got the attention of the crowd, and when he had reasonable silence continued his speech. "I'm not finished yet. I would also like to announce that with the permission of Mrs. Collins and me ma, tonight me and Betty are getting engaged." This was met with a huge cheer, and while the crowd clapped and roared, Mark smiled and slid a single stone engagement ring onto Betty Collins' wedding finger. She was immediately surrounded by every teenage girl in the tent and whisked away to a corner where the ring would be perused, tried on and spun in wishes. Right on cue, the DJ hit the button to play, yes, once again, Cliff Richard singing, "Congratulations." Ben Daly was half asleep, sitting in front of the television he had rented from the shop below his bedsit when the phone rang. He walked to the hall outside the flat where the public phone hung and he answered it. "Hello?" The caller was Manny Wise. "Manny, what's up?" "Ben, mate, I'm in a bit of a bother. I'm in the nick." "Jesus, why? What happened?" "It don't matter now. I'll fill you in on all that later. For now I need you to get some dough. Do you have 50 quid? 50 quid? Jesus, no. I've about 7 quid, that's all, Manny." Have you still got the spare key to my apartment?" "Yeah." "Right then, here's what I want you to do." Manny gave Ben strict instructions on how to open the safe's combination lock. Begin at 0, go 82 to the right, back to 0, spin all the way around to the right, back to 0 again. Then go 80 to the left, and then go back to 9 on the right. Then turn the locking handle. He told him to get £50 in cash from the safe and to take a further 20 quid to cover a taxi fare out to Maidstone police station. Ben could tell from the way Manny's final instructions, "Move your arse," was delivered, that our Manny didn't have the bottle for a prison cell. When Ben walked up the Edgware Road, he saw the police car parked outside the Chinese restaurant. He checked his pocket for the small torch he had brought and ducked down an alley to go into the apartment through the back door. He climbed the 2 flights of stairs to Manny's place, slid the key in the lock and quietly turned it. The door opened easily. He didn't need a torch to find his way to the study. Before tackling the safe, he checked from the corner of the window that the car was still in place. It was. He crossed the room and bent low to the safe. Ben had never opened the safe before in his life, but he followed the instructions Manny had given him to the letter. He was surprised when the safe door opened first time. As the door opened wide, so too did Ben's eyes. There was stacks of money. Manny had told Ben to bring along 50 quid and some identification from Manny. He told him also to make sure to bring his Irish passport, which was in the back of the safe. Ben reached over the money and lifted a tray at the back of the safe. The first thing that caught his eye were 2 neat foil-wrapped parcels, one marked CC, the other marked HN. Ben knew exactly what those parcels contained. Underneath the parcels were some stocks, bonds and some official-looking papers, and a yellowed envelope on which was written Dublin Papers. Ben opened the envelope, read the page, and then returned it to the envelope. He sat for a few moments just staring at the money, his mind clicking. Finally he made his decision. He took Manny's passport, and into it he slid £50 in sterling. He then took the 2 foil-wrapped parcels and stuffed one into each pocket of his anorak. He took a fistful of money, which later turned out to be £3,000, and rammed it down the belt of his trousers. He closed the safe and left. Trevor was the only one of the Browne family that was not a talker. Conversations with him were usually one-way traffic, and his answers were as short as possible, if not entirely monosyllabic. "I have a letter for you, Mummy." "A letter? For me? From who?" Agnes frowned. "From Miss Conway." Miss Conway was the principal of St. Mary's School, where Trevor went. In her mid-50s, it was unlikely now that she would ever marry. Monday to Friday she devoted herself to the school, tirelessly working on the young children in an effort to open their minds to the possibilities and opportunities that could lie before them. Miss Conway believed that there was no such thing as a bad child. She was a strict disciplinarian, but even the worst of the children regarded her as fair, and the rest positively adored her. She was a branch secretary of the newly formed Greenpeace, an organisation working for a better environment throughout the world. She also spent part of her weekends teaching travellers' children, visiting halting sites all over Dublin City and the surrounding areas. She was a prominent member of Victor Bewley's Travellers' Trust. Agnes regarded her as a weirdo and always referred to her as the do-gooder. Trevor left the table and returned with an envelope which he sheepishly handed to his mother. Agnes tore open the envelope and read the short letter. "Christ, now what's wrong?" "What is it, Mummy?" Mark asked. "She'd like me to drop up tomorrow to have a little chat about Trevor." Agnes put the letter down on the table and scolded Trevor. "What have you done now?" "I don't know." Trevor looked back down to his plate. Everybody went back to eating their dinner. After a couple of moments, Agnes reached into her apron pocket and took out an envelope. "Speaking of letters, I got this morning." She held up the white envelope. Mark recognised it immediately. What is it, Mummy?" he asked. "A card from Francis." All heads lifted from their plates simultaneously, and in unison the family said, "Frankie?" "That's right, Francis." "Where is he? What's he doing?" Cathy asked. "Doing very well for himself. Working as a travelling salesman, he says. Will I read it to yous?" Agnes took the card from the envelope. On the front she read, "Thinking of you, Mother," which was above a bouquet of flowers. Agnes read this aloud, as if it were poetry. And then she began. "Dear Mammy, I am so sorry I have not written to you in such a long time. What happened to Rory was a mistake, but even so, I should never have been a part of it, and I will never find enough words to tell Rory how sorry I am." Agnes looked to Rory and smiled. "He's sorry, love," in case he hadn't heard what she'd read. Then she went on. "Can you ever forgive me for taking your bingo money? The only explanation I can offer is that I was frightened and I knew I had to leave the country. I had no money, so I took what was there. If it takes me forever, I will pay you back. I enclose £40 as a first payment." Agnes now delved into her apron pocket and held aloft 2 English £20 notes, moving them in a circular motion around the table so that each one of the children could have a chance to see them. Again she smiled and put the £40 back in her pocket. "I am working as a travelling salesman, so there is no point in me giving you a return address. I move so often. But I will be in touch again soon. Love, your son, Francis." Agnes closed the card, and Mark once again saw that twinkle in her eye that had been missing for so long. "Here, let's see it, Ma," Dermot asked, and took the card from his mother's hand. He studied it for a few moments, and over the top of it he peered at Mark. Mark caught his gaze and dropped his eyes. Dermot knew about things. He closed the card and handed it back to his mother. "Well, that's great, Mummy. At least we all know he's well. It'll stop you worrying so much." Dermot went back to his tea. "Yes," Agnes said to no one in particular, and she held the card to her breast. That night Mark Browne and Cathy Browne both headed out on dates. Dermot called in for Buster Brady, and the two of them headed off for a game of snooker to the Crossgun Snooker Club in Fisborough. Rory took Trevor to a movie. So it was that Agnes was alone when Pierre called for one of his early visits, knowing he had to be back to the pizza parlour before 11 o'clock. Agnes had told Pierre that day about Frankie's letter. Pierre knew how important this letter was to Agnes, and he was pleased with the mixture of excitement and relief in Agnes's tone. He arrived at the house with a bottle of champagne, and he was prepared for a celebration. He wasn't prepared, however, for what he got. Agnes was on such a high that the champagne vanished within a half an hour of Pierre's arrival. They sat side by side on the Loretta suite, and Agnes snuggled up to Pierre. Suddenly, and without any announcement, Agnes began to unbutton Pierre's shirt. She ran her fingers through his soft, downy chest hair, and Pierre's nipples popped up like two little tin-hatted soldiers peeking out of foxholes. They kissed passionately. Pierre had his arms wrapped around Agnes. Just above his thumb, he felt the zipper of her dress. Slowly, he pulled the zipper midway down Agnes's back. He gently slid his hand in a circular motion over her baby-soft skin, and she shuddered to his touch. She wore no bra. Pierre now decided to go for gold, and finding the zip again, he pulled it down to its finishing position at Agnes's buttocks. Agnes had been hugging Pierre with both her arms wrapped around his neck, and she now removed her arms. Pierre had expected this. He couldn't even believe he had got this far. He now expected Agnes to put her hands behind her back and, without breaking the kiss, redo the zip midway up her back, if not all the way up. Instead, while still kissing him, Agnes took a half-step back, dropped her arms to her side, and the dress slid to the ground. So it was that night that Agnes Browne, a widow with one child engaged, one nearly engaged, and at 41 years of age, had, in a corporation house in Finglas, her very first organism. And the man she was with had too. Agnes hated these visits to the principal's office. She'd had one or two courtesy of Dermot, and God knows Frankie had her up to the school so often that some of the teachers thought she was staff. Miss Conway's office was neat and tidy, as Agnes had expected. But instead of the smell of dusty books and stale cigarette smoke that Agnes usually associated with the principal's office, Miss Conway's had a beautiful aroma of Estée Lauder. Miss Conway entered the office very busily. She looked every inch the school principal. "I'm terribly sorry to keep you waiting, Mrs. Browne." "That's all right, love. What's wrong?" "I want to talk to you about Trevor." I guessed that. He's the only one I still have at the school." Agnes smiled. Miss Conway didn't see the joke. "Quite so. Mrs. Browne, your son is showing an amazing propensity for artistic endeavour." She dropped this like a bombshell, but it might as well have been a water balloon, for Agnes hadn't a clue what she was talking about. "What do you mean, miss?" Miss Conway placed her elbows on the desk, put her hands together as if she were praying, and put her fingers against her lips. She was considering the best way of illustrating her point to an obviously puzzled Agnes Browne. "Take a look at that window, Mrs. Browne." Miss Conway began, pointing at the window behind Agnes. Agnes turned in her chair and looked. What had once been a plain school window about 8 feet wide by 4 feet high had now been painted in stained glass style with the scene from The Last Supper. The colours used were stark and exciting, and the meal, which was to be the basis of Christian rite, looked like a celebration rather than the wake it is usually depicted as. The artist obviously had a different spiritual point of view to the one most commonly held. The window was beautiful. On a sunny day, one could imagine this office filled with colours. The work of art also served to distract one's attention from the fact that there was a large crack, half moon-shaped, in the top right-hand corner of the window. Agnes turned back to Miss Conway. "What about it?" "Your son did that," Miss Conway announced proudly. "The little bastard! I'll fucking kill him! How much will it cost to replace?" Agnes hadn't seen the painting. All she had seen was the crack. "The painting, Mrs. Browne! Your son did the painting!" Agnes spun around again, and this time she saw the painting. Slowly she stood and walked to the window. She gently laid her hand upon the figure of Matthew, who was pouring wine for Judas. She turned her head to Miss Conway. "My son did this?" Miss Conway beamed a smile. "Yes, Mrs. Browne, Trevor did that. Mrs. Browne, I honestly believe that in Trevor we could have another Monet, Picasso, or Salvador Dali." Agnes stared at her blankly for a moment, hoping the names Miss Conway was rattling off were artists and not terrorists. Agnes again returned her gaze to the window and slowly walked backwards to her seat and sat down hard. "That's why I asked to see you, Mrs. Browne. You see, I have a friend in the National College of Art. I've already shown him some of Trevor's work, and he too believes the child is gifted. So I would like your permission to send Trevor there immediately. I think you should start working with oils and acrylics as soon as possible. And what do you think?"
How much will it cost?
Agnes was being careful. I believe I can secure a grant from the Arts Council. Talent like Trevor's, Mrs. Browne, is a national treasure. Having granted her permission and signed the necessary application forms, Agnes left the school a happy mother. Walking back home, she racked her brain trying to figure out where Trevor's talent had come from. She decided that the only candidate was Uncle Gonzo, the plumber, who was great with his hands. Agnes waited until everyone had finished their tea that evening before making the announcement that Trevor would be attending the National College of Art and that Miss Conway regarded him as a national treasure. Everyone clapped and congratulated Trevor, who just shrugged it off. After the bingo that night in the Carrick Inn, Agnes retold the entire encounter with Miss Conway to Carmel Dowdall. Now, it might have been the high of the last couple of days that caused Agnes to overstep her usual 2 glasses of cider, but the drinks just seemed to be going down very fast, and the lounge boy was replacing them as quickly as the girls were downing them. By the time they left for home, they'd had 5 or maybe 6 each, and they were a little tipsy. They rounded a corner of the Carrick Inn to go past a chip shop. There was a single lamp outside this chip shop, and a group of men, about 20 or 25 of them, stood around it in a circle, playing pitch and toss. As Agnes got closer to the group, she saw 2 young lads standing in the middle and recognised Dermot's voice as he cried, "Heads a $50." Agnes screamed, "Dermot Browne, are you playing in that toss school?" Agnes had got it slightly wrong. Dermot and Buster were not playing in the toss school, they were running the toss school. Quickly and without reply, the 2 young men gathered their money off the ground and scampered across the field towards home. The group of men were displeased. Dermot and Buster were obviously up a few bob.
What did you do that for?
One of the men grumbled.
You should know better, you big bowsy. They're only Chisellers.
Agnes replied, her speech a bit slurred.
Yous go on home to yous our wives.
Carmel Dowdall now added to the attack.
Go on now with that, yous pair of fucking drunken wagons.
Another voice called from the group, and the men laughed. Agnes stood unsteadily, with her hands on her hips, and Carmel Dowdall linked onto her, the blind leading the blind.
I'll have yous know my daughter is going out with a guard, and one of me sons is the managing director. Don't you call us wagons?
The 2 women turned to walk away, and over her shoulder, Carmel Dowdall added,
Yeah, and one of her Chisellers is a national fucking treasure. So there.
With that, Agnes and Carmel haughtily trotted off into the darkness. London. Things had not gone well for Ben Daly in the 6 months since he'd stroked many wives. The £3,000 he had stolen disappeared quickly. He gambled some, drank some more, and even lost £750 of it from his pocket while he slept on top of a cardboard box in a lane one night, in a drunken, drugged stupor. He sold the cocaine for a pittance, and all of the heroin he used himself. What little remained would last him no more than 3 or 4 days. He had no clothes except what he wore on his back. His pants reeked of stale piss, and his jacket of drug-induced vomit. His hair was now long and matted, and he had a beard and moustache, which made his sunken cheeks and eyes even more pronounced. The veins in both his legs and both arms had collapsed with so many puncture marks tracked along them. One would think someone had run a sewing machine across them. He was now reduced to injecting the heroin under his tongue. His latest fix was beginning to take hold. He felt better. In a while he would feel wonderful. He sat on the steel steps that ran down to the basement of a dry-cleaning shop. It was after 2 a.m, but still the dry cleaners was working flat out, and the warm air coming up from the extractor fans was comforting. He tucked his hands beneath his arms, turned up his collar, and leaned against the red brick wall. He closed his eyes, and as so often before, his thoughts drifted to home. He thought of the quays on the River Liffey, filling his nostrils with the smell of roasted hops coming from the Guinness brewery. He floated over Henry Street and saw the colourful shoppers smiling and laughing, and the music from golden discs on the corner of Mary Street drifted up to meet him. He passed Moore Street, but didn't go down Moore Street. No, not Moore Street. He would never go down there. He couldn't. Not now. Not ever again. As the potent drug began to take its full grip on him, he felt warm and wonderful, and a huge smile crossed his face. But salt tears flowed like fountains from his eyes. A few more days, and then what? Ben Daly would cross that bridge when he came to it.
It's like Houston Station in here. Agnes roared this as Dermot crawled beneath her legs looking for a missing shoe. Stay easy, Mammy, will you? Rory told her for the 50th time. Rory was blow-drying Agnes's hair. He'd already done haircuts on Mark, Dermot, Trevor and Buster Brady, and a trim Lair and Bob and Cathy. Everybody's hair was ready for the wedding except his own. Rory looked over his shoulder at Dino, who was now putting on Trevor's bow tie. Dino, will you do mine when I'm finished here, will you? Rory asked his friend. Course I will, love, Dino replied. The love had slipped out. Rory shot Dino a glance, and Dino grimaced, but the entire thing went completely over Agnes's head. Rory then looked at Mark. It hadn't gone over Mark's head. Rory blushed. Mark walked over to him, a serious look on his face, and he put his hand on his brother's shoulder. As long as you're happy, Rory, that's all I care about. I am, Mark. Well then, good. Mark went back out to the kitchen to make yet another cup of tea for yet another visiting neighbour. For a man who was about to be married in an hour and a half, Mark was remarkably calm. His brothers were running around like headless chickens, trying to put all the pieces of their tuxedos on as if they were giant jigsaw puzzles. The neighbours had been coming and going since early morning. This was traditional in a Dublin home on a wedding day. Mark made 2 cups of tea and carried both of them upstairs to the boys' bedroom, where Simon was standing in front of a mirror with a sheet of paper in his hand. And the Lord Jesus said unto them, Here's Simon. Here's tea. Mark placed the mug on the dressing table. Thanks, Mark. Simon sat on the bed and took a sip of tea. You don't have to do this, Simon. Mark tried to ease the pressure on Simon. I want to, Mark. Mark smiled at his brother. Then I want you to. The turmoil was no less frantic in the Collins household. Mrs. Collins wasn't in the tea mode. She had cases and cases of bottles of Guinness. She had expected 10 or 15 callers that morning, but her sitting room now resembled a rush-hour bus in Calcutta. There was barely room to move. It seemed that every customer she'd ever had decided to pay a visit. Still, with Mark and Betty paying for their own wedding, the least she could do was lay on a decent spread at home, and she had certainly done that. Cathy was upstairs in the bedroom with Betty, helping her to dress as a chief bridesmaid should. Did you take a look at Pierre's face? Cathy asked Betty, looking at her in the mirror. It had been a close shave for Pierre. When the eventual plans for the wedding were announced, the first thing Pierre noted was that he would not be taking the place of the father figure of the Browne family at the top table. This duty Mark had entrusted to Rory, with Dermot as best man and Simon as groomsman. Mark immediately saw the disappointment on Pierre's face, so he quickly carried on. Oh, Pierre, Betty and I have a special favour to ask you. Mark took Betty's hand. Pierre tried to show interest and hide his disappointment at the same time, expecting a request from the happy couple that he should stand outside the church as people arrived and give them flowers or some such menial task. Instead, it was Betty that spoke. Pierre, I know how attached you are to the Browne family, but I wonder, would it be possible, just for one day, to be my father and give me away? She smiled. So did Pierre. His spirits lifted immediately. There could be only one thing better than being a father to the groom, and that's a father to the bride. He would get to walk down the aisle with a beautiful young woman on his arm, decked out in white. Pierre was overcome and accepted readily. That night he and Agnes celebrated with yet another bottle of champagne and a couple of organisms thrown in for good measure. Pierre now stood downstairs among the throbbing crowd in the Collins sitting room, with a smile on his face that looked as if it had been put there by plastic surgery. At 3 o'clock precisely, Mark and his 3 brothers sat in the front pew before the altar in Gardner Street Church. Although it was cool outside, the sun beamed through the stained glass windows, and every conceivable colour was spread out along the church walls. Suddenly somebody said, "She's here!" 3 of the boys swivelled their heads immediately, but not Mark. He suddenly stiffened, and for a moment the enormity of what he was about to do washed over him. The organist struck up "Here Comes the Bride," and everybody stood. That moment of panic that every groom knows lasted just a couple of seconds. The ceremony went without a hitch. Then came the reading. Simon got up and climbed the steps to the podium. He'd been practising in front of a mirror for weeks now, convinced that a large intake of breath followed by a slow delivery would minimise, if not completely eradicate, his stutter.
As he took his place and opened his little booklet, everybody sitting on the Browne side of the church took a large intake of breath. A letter from St. Paul to the Corinthians. For a moment, everybody's heart stopped. But Simon went on and completed his reading without one more falter. When he had finished and closed the booklet, Agnes began to clap. She was quickly joined by the rest of the Browne family, and then by the entire congregation, the Collins side clapping even though they didn't know why. At the reception in the Maples Hotel in Drumcondra later, over 30 people approached Simon to congratulate him on such a well-read lesson. The melon wedge, vegetable soup and stuffed turkey and ham, followed by sherry trifle and tea, was quickly devoured by the 120 guests attending the wedding meal. Finally, a teaspoon was hammered against the glass, and the room fell into silence for the best man, Dermot Browne. Dermot stood up and began his speech. Ladies, gentlemen, Reverend Father, yous are all very welcome here today to celebrate Mark getting his leg over. Nobody laughed except Buster Brady. Agnes's thunderous look to Dermot was enough to tell him there were to be no more remarks like that. What does that mean? The celebrating priest, Father Simmons, asked Mrs. Collins. Oh, it's something to do with the tradition of stepping over the broom, Father. Oh, I see. Very interesting. Dermot's speech now was shorter than he intended as he stuck to the bare essentials, thanking the priest for a lovely ceremony, thanking the bridesmaids for looking so beautiful, thanking the hotel for a lovely bit of grub, and thanking the guests collectively for the lovely wedding presents that Mark and Betty had received. He then moved on to the telegrams and cards. Needless to say, there was one from Dolly in Canada, one from Greg Smith in England, and one from Mr. Wise, who couldn't be there because of ill health, and was still confined to the Bon Secours Hospital. Mark's heart sank a little bit at this one, as his thoughts drifted back to the kindly Jewman laughing heartily as he spoke to a snotty-nosed little boy outside the turf depot all those years ago. The next and last telegram brought a smile to Agnes's face. Dermot read it aloud. Congratulations and best wishes to both of you on your wedding day, and wishing you future happiness always. And that comes from Francis Browne in London. That's me brother. Dermot glanced sidelong at Mark's puzzled face. This last telegram was greeted with a round of applause, and under the cover of the noise, Dermot said from the corner of his mouth to Mark, "Two can play at your game," and he winked. Mark smiled and looked down the table at his glowing mother. The meal was followed by a tremendous celebration. Most people got drunk. Old friendships were renewed, and, as is traditional on a large family occasion in Dublin, many hatchets were buried for the day. At 10 o'clock that evening, as the party was in full swing, the new Mr. and Mrs. Mark Browne departed in Mark's new company car for their honeymoon in Galway. They had planned a 2-week honeymoon, the first week in Galway, the second in Killarney. However, circumstances were to interrupt Mark's honeymoon when it was just 8 days old. Nurse Maureen Clifford's foam rubber heels squelched as she walked along the quiet midnight corridor of St. Thomas's ward. It was so quiet that even the noise of her nylons could be heard as they rubbed together at the knees. She stopped quite suddenly. The sound of the cardiac alarm was piercing. It was coming from behind her. She spun around. The light over the door of room 7 was flashing on and off. In 2 strides she made it to the wall phone, dialed 0, the emergency number, and called, "Cardiac arrest, room 7. She then quickly replaced the receiver. By the time the cardiac team arrived, no more than 50 seconds later, she'd already opened the pyjama jacket and was pumping the chest with her palms. Her efforts failed, and as the cardiac team burst into the room, she stepped well back. The gel packs were quickly opened, applied to the chest and to the terminals of the electrodes. They were placed on the chest. The doctor shouted, "Clear!" and the tiny body suddenly leapt in the bed. All eyes turned to the monitor, but it still showed a straight line. They tried the procedure again and again for 15 minutes. At exactly 22 minutes past midnight, Dr. William Deegan declared Benjamin Wise officially dead. The funeral was well attended at Mount Sinai, a Jewish cemetery on Dublin's south side. Sadly, there was only one man who cried at the funeral. Mark Browne was consoled by his bride of only 10 days. Benjamin Wise's only son, Manny, was there also. But there were no tears from him. When the burial rite was over, Mark walked up to Manny Wise and extended his hand. Manny's hand was like a dead fish. "I'm sorry for your loss," Mark said, though really things should have been the other way around. "Yeah, sure. Mark, isn't it?" "Yes, Mark Browne. I'm the managing director of your father's, well, I suppose your company now." They began to stroll towards the cars. "The furniture business, yeah, that's right. What do you reckon it's worth, Mark?" The question surprised Mark. "In what sense?" "In the sense of what would I get if I sold it?" "It's not that kind of factory, Mr. Wise. Your father's factory has very few assets. Its real worth is in what it can produce, and it can produce reasonable quality furniture at the right price for a long time to come. You won't be dissatisfied with the books. Why don't you come down and have a look? I'll go through them with you." "No, I'm not in the furniture business, Mark. I'll probably just close the place and sell off the property. Unless, of course, you want to buy it." "I wouldn't have that kind of money, Mr. Wise." Mark was now worried about the futures of the 42 men who were employed by Sanger Furniture. The two were joined by a much older man. Mark thought he recognised the face, but couldn't place him. Manny Wise had no idea who the man was at all. The man took Manny's hand, offered his condolences, and introduced himself. "My name is David Jacobson, Mr. Wise. I was your father's solicitor." Then Mark remembered him. He extended his hand. "Hello, Mr. Jacobson." "Hello, Mark. It's good to see you again, son." The elderly man turned his attention once again to Manny Wise. "It's my understanding that you are a resident overseas, Mr. Wise, so perhaps expediency will be appropriate in the matter of your father's will." "A will?" Manny was perplexed. "Oh, yes, Mr. Wise. Senior left a will, and as was his way, everything is correct and proper. May I suggest a reading early tomorrow, say 10:30 in the morning? Would that suit both of you?" He looked from one man to the other. "Both of us?" Mark inquired. "Yes, Mr. Browne. Mr. Wise left explicit instructions that you were to be there for the reading." "And what about me? Did he leave any instructions about me?" "Oh, I think he knew for sure that you would be there." Mr. Jacobson delivered this jab without so much as blinking. The funeral was not like the traditional Irish funerals that the Browns were familiar with. They stood around waiting to see which pub the crowd would be adjourning to, only to see them scatter away in their cars. "That's no way to pay your respects," Dermot stated. "They have different ways from us," Sean McHugh explained. "Well, fuck the different ways. Let's send them off our way," Dermot insisted. There were nods of agreement all round, and the Browne family, along with the entire staff of Sanger Furnishings, made their way to the city centre, to Foley's pub, and betook themselves to alcohol. As the afternoon progressed, there were many tales told of moments of kindness by Mr. Wise. Sean McHugh had an audience for a full 30 minutes, as he told of the heartbreak young Manny had caused his father over the years. This was met with a lot of tut-tuts and comments like "little brat" from the older members of staff and "smarmy bollocks" from the younger ones. As more drink was taken, the atmosphere lightened and ballads began. During the fourth verse of Sean McHugh's rendition of James Connolly, Mark slipped out of Foley's. He took the scarf down, turned his collar up, and stuffing his hands into his pockets, he began to walk around the area of his berth. He soon found himself standing outside the turf depot. Across from it was the tiny terraced cottage in which the kindly old man had spent his years. For a moment, Mark saw Mr. Wise framed in the doorway of the cottage. He could see the old man there wearing 6 cardigans. In his outstretched palm, the 2-shilling piece reward he had given to young Mark every Saturday for lighting his fire. "Jesus Christ, Mr. Wise. Where's the cocoa now that I need it?" Mark said this aloud and began to cry. He sat on the small turf depot wall for over an hour, but now reliving the happy thoughts and memories he had of the man who in so many ways had replaced his father. He then made his way back to Foley's, where he proceeded to get absolutely blind drunk. He arrived home to his new flat on the North Circular Road in the early hours of the morning. He went to bed fully dressed, and as his young wife cradled his head like a little baby, Mark sobbed himself to sleep. He awoke to the crackle of rashers frying in the kitchen. The aroma was beautiful, and he felt good until he moved. The pain in the back of his head and right down his spine was excruciating. He groaned. "You're up, then?" Betty asked this from the doorway of the bedroom. "Oh, what hit me?" "Life," Betty said simply. "Is it late?" "Yeah, I suppose it is for you. It's 10 minutes to 10. But that's all right, because last night in Foley's pub you gave all the staff the rest of the week off on full pay." "Oh, did I?" "Yep." Betty smiled at him. Mark lay back down again gingerly and put his hands over his eyes.
Oh, well, they deserve it. They're going to have a lot more than the rest of the week off if Manny Wise has his way. Suddenly he sat bolt upright. Manny Wise! Jesus Christ, what time did you say it was? 10 to 10, Betty answered. Mark jumped from the bed, forgetting his pain. The will! Christ, Jacobson's reading the will this morning at 10:30. Where's Jacobson's office? Manny Wise was already sitting in the waiting room of David Jacobson's office when Mark arrived. Good morning, Mr. Wise. Yeah, good morning, son. The super-efficient Thelma, Mr. Jacobson's secretary, looked up and down at Mark. Mr. Browne, I presume? Yes, that's right, Mark Browne. The woman picked up the telephone receiver, pressed a button and announced, They're both here now, Mr. Jacobson. She stood up. Follow me, please. The two men were led into a large meeting room into which David Jacobson entered simultaneously from another door. Good morning, gentlemen. Please sit down. When the three were seated, David Jacobson unbound a file and extracted a yellow sealed envelope. He laid it face down on the table, then passed it to the two men and asked them to witness the seal had not been broken. Mark nodded and slid it to Manny Wise. Yeah, get on with it, mate. I've got a plane to catch. Manny pushed the envelope back to Mr. Jacobson. The solicitor opened the envelope, extracted a single sheet of paper, and read the following. I, Benjamin Wise, being of sound mind, residing in number 2 Cornell Cottages in Dublin city centre, make this as my final will and testament. I presume that there are 3, or at least 2, sitting in audience as my solicitor David Jacobson reads this will. Sean McHugh may not be there, but this is no matter, for I know my words will be communicated to him faithfully by David Jacobson. Mark Browne I know is sitting there, for I left explicit instructions that he should be, and he has never failed to carry out my instructions. For this I thank you, Mark, and I thank you also for the care, kindness, and warmth that you have always shown to me. I want you to know too, Mark, that it has been your courage, honesty, and tenacity that has kept me alive for as long as I have stayed alive. I hope you miss me now, for I would surely be missing you were these roles reversed. But I ask you to think of the happy times we had together, and know this, that they were the greatest moments of my life. I thank you, Mark. Manny, you little shit, I want you to listen closely to my will. Mr. Jacobson did not raise his eyes from the paper as he read that piece. So, here we go. To my first employee and longest friend on this earth, Sean McHugh, I leave my home, unencumbered by mortgage or debt. It is not fit to be lived in, but I hope he will sell it, and that the proceeds of this sale will make his closing years as comfortable as his friendship made mine. My only other assets are the premises and business of Sengasaw Furnishings, formerly Wise & Company, and the retail shop premises in Capel Street, known as Wise & Company Bespoke Furniture. My interest in these, the property deeds of both premises, and indeed my business, though I am embarrassed to say this, for the business was never mine, but belonged to the man who made it. All of this I leave to Mark Browne. My only request of him being that he has as much thought for the staff within these businesses as I have taught him to have. To my son Manny, I leave all he ever wanted, his own ego. I hope the two of you are very happy together. Signed, Benjamin Wise. Mr. Jacobson folded the paper slowly and looked up. So there you have it, gentlemen. Mark didn't know what to say or do. He just sat still at the giant conference table, staring at his folded hands in front of him. Suddenly, Manny Wise burst into laughter. Mark jumped with fright, and Mr. Jacobson frowned. You find this funny, Mr. Wise? It obviously wasn't proper to laugh in a solicitor's office at the reading of a will. Manny Wise took a cigarette from a pack, lit it, exhaled, and drummed his fingers on the table. Yes, I do find it funny, Mr. Jacobson. Tell me, when was this will made? 2 years ago in 1973, Mr. Jacobson answered quite solemnly. Again Manny Wise burst into laughter. Then it's not worth shit, Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson became indignant. How dare you, Mr. Wise? I assure you this will is perfectly legal and was drawn up at the greatest of integrity by myself and witnessed by my secretary. Thelma, isn't that so? He turned to Thelma, who nodded her assent, at the same time giving Mr. Wise the evil eye. Manny stood up. "My father cannot leave something to someone that he does not own." Manny said these words very carefully. Jacobson was now confused. "Can you be more precise, Mr. Wise? What are you saying?" "I'm saying that in London I've got a document dated prior to this will in which my father signed everything over to me, for love and natural affection." "I don't believe it. Believe it, Mr. Jacobson. Believe it. I refuse to believe it. Mr. Wise made me well aware of his relationship with you, and he would hold no truck with your involvement in his business affairs." "I've got the document, Mr. Jacobson." Manny now virtually sneered. David Jacobson sat quietly for a couple of moments, gathering himself. The outburst was uncommon for him, and he now returned to his calm, cool solicitor mode. "All right, Mr. Wise. I will give you until Friday at 3 o'clock to produce the said document here in this office. If we can verify your father's signature on such a document, then I will suggest a number of law firms you should go to contest this will. However, if by 3 o'clock on Friday this supposed document is not produced, then I shall execute this will post-haste." London. Aer Lingus flight EI-111 had touched down in Heathrow Airport at exactly 1:05 p.m, precisely on time. Throughout the flight and the 1.25-hour journey by taxi from Heathrow to his apartment on the Edgware Road, Manny had been very relaxed and confident. When he arrived into the hallway outside his apartment, young Joe Fitzgerald was standing waiting for him. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you." "How did you know I'd be home?" "I didn't. I just knew you'd come home sometime." Manny inserted his key into the lock and turned it. The door opened and Joe followed Manny in. "So, how long are you there, waiting?" Manny asked the junkie as he removed his coat. "Since last night, I slept sitting outside the door." "Outside my door? All night? You fucking asshole." I need a favour, Manny." "Do you now, Joe? And what kind of a favour would that be, Joe?" There was a growing sense inside Manny that the tide was turning against him, and he felt agitated. He certainly wasn't in any humour for the Joe Fitzgeralds of this world. "I need a fix, Manny. Bad." "That's no problem, Joe. Give me the few bob you owe me. The price of a fix, and Bob's your uncle." "I don't have any money." "What? Speak up, Joe. What's that? You don't have any money?" Manny's tone was mocking, and the young man just shook his head. "Well, there's a Russian phrase for that, Joe. Tufsky shitsky. Now fuck off, I'm busy." Manny turned his back on the young man to pour himself a drink. "Give me a fix, Manny." Joe Fitzgerald screamed this as he lunged at Manny. His decimated form used as much impact as it could on Manny's slump back. Manny toppled forward, his head going through the glass door of the drinks cabinet, sending bottles of booze and broken glass flying in all directions. But Joe Fitzgerald was undernourished, weak, and disorientated for the want of a heroin fix. He was no match for Manny Wise, although the ferocity of his attack had initially caught Manny by surprise. The clash lasted just seconds. After regaining his footing, Manny landed his very first blow, a punch flat to the nose, pushing Joe's cartilage back into his face. The young man dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Even though Joe Fitzgerald was unconscious from the very first blow, Manny continued to kick him for a further 30 seconds. Manny was now crazed, and his breath was coming in grunts. He walked away from Joe's body and stumbled over a footstool. As he got up from the floor, he took with him a bottle of scotch that had been lying on its side close to his hand. Then he slumped into an armchair and uncorked the bottle. It was at this precise moment that Derek Wilson, Sergeant Major retired, rang the police from his apartment below Manny Wise's. In his early 80s, and even though still a little scared from his last confrontation with his upstairs neighbour, Sergeant Major Wilson had had enough. Manny sat pale and shaking, and he gulped hungrily from the bottle. The warm golden liquid burned his throat. He rose from the armchair. Carrying the scotch, he went to the bathroom and checked the damage in the mirror. There was a 3-inch long gash from his hairline down to the middle of his forehead. It needed a stitch. He put the scotch bottle down on the toilet cistern, deciding to wash the streaks of blood that covered his face. But suddenly changing his mind, he decided he would shower later.
He rearmed himself with the bottle and headed for the study. What he really needed now was a snort of cocaine. He wheeled his office chair away from the front of the safe and quickly opened the combination lock. Stretching over the money, he removed the tray at the back. On top of the tray was a foil-wrapped 1-kilo package of cocaine. He picked up the package in his left hand and held it up to his nose, taking a sniff. It was then he thought about the document that had brought him back from Dublin so quickly. With the cocaine still in his left hand, he began to remove the papers in the tray, one by one. Stocks, bonds, a few letters of credit, and then nothing. The yellowed envelope marked Dublin papers was not there. He quickly bent to the safe and again with his free right arm began to feel around the back behind the money. He felt nothing. In a panic he pulled the money from the safe. A couple of bundles burst and the crisp notes scattered across the room like butterflies. Slowly Manny Wise stood erect. He clenched his fingers and raising his arms over his head he slammed his fists into the middle of the desk screaming, "No!" Two things happened simultaneously. First, Manny had forgotten that in his left hand he held a foil pack of cocaine. And as his fists hit the desk, the bag burst and a huge white gush of cocaine shot towards the ceiling, spreading out like a nuclear cloud. The second thing was a loud bang as the size 13 black leather shoe of Detective Constable Pete Wilkinson sent the door of Manny's apartment flying wide open. This kick had been delivered with great gusto, for Detective Wilkinson had been waiting for over 2 years to kick down this particular door. The look of surprise on Manny's face as the police poured into his study was matched only by the look of surprise on the officers' faces at the sight that lay before them. Manny Wise had over £60,000 spread in a circle about his feet. In his left hand he held the remains of what was once a kilo of cocaine. The front of his body and face were completely covered in white dust, except for one 3-inch red strip which ran from his hairline to the centre of his forehead. In a low voice, Manny said, "I've been robbed." Dublin. It was Friday. It was 5 minutes to 3 o'clock. Mark Browne sat at his desk in the small office of Senga's Soft Furnishings. He was doodling on a workpad. He stopped doodling and rested his head on his left hand and began tapping the pencil on the desk. He stared at the telephone. In the Tinsley Wire Company, the barbed wire machine ground to a halt. Dermot Browne went to the canteen where he washed his hands and poured himself a glass of milk. He sat down and looked at the canteen clock. The second hand swept slowly around the face. Dermot began to drum his fingers. Dean O'Doyle checked the timer on his client's hairdryer. He reset it by another 2 minutes. He looked up at the clock. It was 3 minutes to 3. He tossed his comb and scissors into the steriliser unit and made his way to the small room at the back of Wash and Blow hairstylists. Rory Browne was sitting there at the table with a mug of coffee in front of him, nervously smoking a cigarette. 3 minutes, Dino announced. "Yeah, 3 minutes, Rory replied. Dino went over to him and gently squeezed his hand. Rory smiled his appreciation. A couple of doctors returning from their lunch break nodded to the likeable young porter as they passed him. Simon Browne simply nodded back. He had his hands dug deep into the pockets of his porter's coat and he strolled along the corridor at a relaxed pace. When he came to the big brown door, he pulled hard on it, for it was quite heavy. He entered and the door closed slowly behind him. Simon loved the quiet of the hospital chapel. He walked to the nearest pew, knelt, and began to pray. Agnes paid the taxi driver and stepped onto the pavement to join Cathy. When they went to the door of Senga's Soft Furnishings, they were met by Betty. The factory was totally quiet. "What's going on here, Betty?" Agnes asked. "What? Oh, the quiet. I don't know, Mrs. B. It's been like that since 2:45. Cathy glanced around the factory. "Where's Mark?" she asked. "In the office, waiting." "I'll go in to him," Agnes began, but Cathy restrained her. "No, Ma, leave him." There was just one telephone in Senga's Soft Furnishings. Because the office was sometimes unmanned, Mark had got the Post and Telegraphs people to rig the phone to a large bell that was mounted outside the office. This way, wherever he was, Mark would know when the phone was ringing and could make his way to the office. At 2 minutes past 3 o'clock, the bell clanged. The staff of Senga's Soft Furnishings were well used to this bell going virtually non-stop throughout the day, yet on this occasion it seemed to clang louder than it had ever clanged. From their vantage point, the three women saw Mark standing up as he placed the receiver to his ear. He stood very still. There was little animation. Then they watched as he slowly took the telephone from his ear and replaced it onto the receiver. Mark began to walk towards the door of the office. Agnes glanced over her shoulder and was surprised to see that there were now over 40 people standing around her. Wherever they had been just 10 seconds before, the phone bell had flushed them out. Mark came out of the office and walked straight across the factory floor to Betty and took her hand. His delivery of the result was very simple. "It's ours." He smiled broadly and Betty threw her arms around his neck. There was a huge cheer from the workforce and a lot of backslapping and handshaking, but eventually everybody drifted back to work. Mark walked his mother and sister to the corner of the street where he waved down a taxi for them to send them home. While he was organising transport for the two, Betty was standing in the office. On the desk she noticed the pad where Mark had been doodling. It was upside down and she turned it around to face her. He had drawn an oblong box inside which he had written just 2 lines. The top line read, "Mark Browne." The second line, "Formerly Wise and Company." Betty smiled. She looked through the glass office door to see Mark already organising things and ploughing into the work as if nothing had changed. But she knew better. She turned back to the pad, picked up the pencil Mark had been using, and on the top line of the new sign, beside the name Mark Browne, she wrote, "And Son." Epilogue. It was a young police constable, walking his beat, who accidentally discovered the body of Frankie Browne beneath sheets of newspaper in an alley at the edge of Chelsea on a freezing November night. The young man's body lay frozen in a fetal position on that -4 degrees night. An autopsy would reveal a number of facts. For instance, that Frankie Browne had died of hypothermia, that he was a long-time drug abuser, and that he had probably not eaten for at least 3 days before his death. Modern technology was amazing more and more people with the secrets it could garner from a frozen corpse. On this occasion, however, there was one secret science could not extract. For the last 8 years of his short and tragic life, Francis Browne had lived under the name of Ben Daly. Before burning the dead man's ragged clothes, an assistant of the coroner's office went through the pockets in search of anything that might be valuable. They were empty, but for a dirty, crumpled envelope, upon which was written, "Dublin Papers." If you take on one of Agnes Browne's children, you take on them all, wherever they are.
Belinda Audio and the O'Brien Press hope you enjoyed the reading of The Chisellers, Agnes Browne, Book 2, written and read by Brendan O'Carroll. Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of audio titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook with you.